If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Frank Westmore. I'm 42 years old and I live alone in these mountains. Well, not completely alone. I have Duke, my German Shepherd. He's been with me since Korea and I trust him more than any human I've ever known. It's October 1963 and something isn't right in the woods around my cabin. I've lived here in the Adirondacks for 4 years now, ever since Eleanor passed. The cabin sits between Twin Pines Lake and Black Rock Ridge. There's no other soul for 26 miles in any direction, just how I like it. This morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The fog on the lake caught my eye, thicker than I've ever seen it. The mist rolled across the water like it was alive, moving slow and lazy. I could hear loons calling from somewhere far away, their cries echoing across the water. Those sounds usually bring me peace, but today they sent a chill up my spine. I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the world wake up. My cabin isn't much, but it's mine. Built it with my own hands after I couldn't stand living in town anymore. The trees around me are ancient, tall hemlocks and white pines that block out most of the sunlight even at noon. Makes the forest floor look like it's always dusk, even during the day. A family of deer grazed at the edge of my clearing. They didn't run when they saw me. That's strange. Wild deer should scatter at the first sign of humans, but these just looked at me with glassy eyes before going back to eating. The breeze shifted, bringing the smells of the forest, pine needles, wet dirt, and something else. Something metallic that made my nose wrinkle. I couldn't place it, but it reminded me of battlefields. That's not a smell you forget. I turned on my radio to catch the weather report. The battery was running low, making the voice sound distant and scratchy. Unusual weather pattern developing across the northeastern Adirondack region. Heavy fog expected to persist for several days. Hikers and campers are advised to postpone trips until visibility improves. Duke paced around the porch, whining softly. I patted his head and grabbed his leash. "Come on, boy. Let's check our traps." But Duke wouldn't budge. He planted his feet and pulled back, staring at the tree line. His ears were flat against his head, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. I've never seen him act like this before. Duke isn't afraid of anything. Not bears, not wolves, not even the thunderstorms that shake the cabin. "What is it, boy?" He just whined and backed up against the door. I unclipped his leash and let him go inside. Something had spooked him bad, and Duke's instincts are never wrong. I stood at the edge of my porch, looking into the trees. The shadows seemed deeper today, pooling under certain trees like black puddles. They didn't move right when the wind blew. It was as if the darkness had weight to it, like it could flow and shift on its own. I shook my head. I was being foolish. Shadows are just shadows. The forest is the same as it's always been. But as I turned to go back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me from within that strange, heavy mist. My radio crackled again, the signal breaking up. Temperatures will drop. Unusual patterns. Residents should... precautions. Then it went dead. Just static. I hit it a couple times, but nothing helped. I looked back at the fog creeping closer to my cabin. For the first time since I moved here, I locked my door. I wasn't always alone up here. I had a life before these woods, before this cabin. After making sure Duke was calm inside, I went to my bedroom and opened the small wooden box I keep by my bed. Inside was the picture of Eleanor, my wife. Her smile still made my heart ache. Even after 2 years, she died of pneumonia in the winter of '61. The doctors said they did everything they could, but I knew better. If we'd lived closer to the hospital instead of that small town, if I'd gotten her there sooner, I touched the scar that runs from my left temple down to my jaw. a reminder of Korea. Most people look away when they see it, but Eleanor never, and did. She'd trace it with her finger and tell me it was just another part of me to love. I put the photo back and touched the leather cord around my neck. Eleanor's wedding ring hung from it, alongside a strange black stone I found in Korea. An old Korean man had given it to me after I helped his village. He said it offered protection from evil things that walk in darkness. I never believed in such things, but I kept it to remember the good I'd done in a war filled with so much bad. I wasn't supposed to come back from Korea. My whole unit was wiped out in an ambush in the mountains. The fog was thick that day, too. We couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The enemy knew the terrain better than we did. They came out of nowhere. I was the only one who made it out alive. Sometimes I still hear the screams in my dreams. After that, I became a wilderness survival instructor, taught people how to live off the land, how to find their way when lost, how to stay alive when everything around them wanted them dead. I was good at it, but after Eleanor died, I couldn't stand the company of others anymore. Their pity was worse than being alone. So I came here, built this cabin far from any hiking trail or camping ground, started mapping the area, every stream, every cave, every ridge. I know these woods better than anyone. At least I thought I did. Duke padded into the room and put his head on my knee. His brown eyes looked worried. I scratched behind his ears. "It's okay, boy. Just bad memories." But it wasn't just memories bothering him. He kept looking at the window, even though I'd pulled the curtains shut. I checked my watch. Nearly noon, but the light outside was dim like evening. The fog had gotten thicker, pressing against the glass like a living thing. I went to my desk and pulled out my journal. I've kept detailed notes on everything since I moved here: weather patterns, animal movements, plant cycles. Flipping through the pages, I noticed something. The last few months showed strange entries. August 16th. Found deer tracks that stopped suddenly in the middle of a clearing. No signs of predators. September 3rd, birds flying in perfect circles above the lake for hours. Not natural. September 24th, Duke refused to go near the eastern cave system, growled at the entrance until I gave up and turned back. And now, looking at today's date, I realized something else. The nightmares about being watched in the mist had started exactly 1 month ago. At first, just once a week. Then twice. Now I had them almost every night. I reached for my rifle, an M1 Garand from my army days, and checked that it was loaded. Old habits. But something told me whatever was out there wouldn't care much about bullets. The radio suddenly clicked back, on making me jump. The voice that came through was broken and strange. Unusual wildlife behavior reported throughout. Residents advised to stay, do not approach. If you see... Then it cut out again. I looked at Duke, who was now standing alert, his ears perked toward the door. A soft growl rose from his throat. There was a sound outside. Like footsteps, but not quite right. Too light, too many. Coming up to the porch, I held my breath and reached for my rifle. The footsteps on my porch stopped. I stood perfectly still, finger hovering near the trigger of my rifle. Duke's growl grew louder, his eyes fixed on the door. Then whatever it was moved away. I heard the steps going around the side of the cabin, circling it slowly. When the sounds faded, I went to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. The fog had swallowed everything beyond 20 feet of the cabin. It was like a white wall had been built around my home. "Come on, Duke," I whispered. "Let's check it out." The dog followed me reluctantly to the door. I grabbed my hunting knife and tucked it into my belt. The rifle I kept ready in my hands. As soon as I opened the door, Duke started growling again, this time at the mist itself. It rolled toward us across the yard, thicker than any natural fog I'd ever seen. It seemed to move against the breeze, which wasn't right. "Stay close, boy." I stepped out onto the porch, scanning for whatever had made those footsteps. The boards were wet with moisture from the fog. But there was something else, too. small puddles of clear liquid that didn't look like water. When I crouched to look closer, the liquid seemed to be disappearing, not drying but turning straight into air without leaving any trace behind. That's when I saw the tracks in the soft ground beyond. My porch, my blood ran cold. They looked almost like human footprints, but wrong. Too long and narrow with only 3 toes showing in each print. And at the end of each toe was the mark of what could only be a claw. Duke wouldn't go near them. He backed, away, tail tucked between his legs. "It's okay, boy, we'll stay inside today." Back in the cabin, I locked the door and tried the radio again. This time, I turned the dial slowly between stations. The static gave way to voices, broken words and sentences that made no sense. They sounded like English played backward, rising, and falling in pitch as if having a conversation. I quickly turned it off. The silence that followed was almost worse. Looking out the window again, I noticed something odd about the forest. It was completely quiet. No birds calling, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Just dead silence, as if every living thing was holding its breath. The day passed slowly. I kept busy checking my supplies, cleaning my weapons, and writing in my journal. By late afternoon, the fog had retreated somewhat, and I decided to risk a quick trip to check my traps. Duke refused to come, so I left him watching from the window. I hadn't gone more than 100 yards when I found them. 6 deer, arranged in a perfect circle in a small clearing. I've been a hunter all my life, seen animals killed by all sorts of predators, but I'd never seen anything like this. They were completely empty, like hollow skins with no blood, no organs, nothing inside. Yet there wasn't a single cut or tear on any of them. No sign of how whatever killed them had gotten inside. My compass started spinning wildly in my pocket. When I took it out, the needle whirled around, never settling on any direction. Useless. The air grew suddenly cold. My breath came out in white. Clouds and frost started forming on the leaves around me. It was like stepping into winter in a matter of seconds. That's when I saw them, the trees at the edge of the clearing. Someone or something had carved symbols into the bark, strange marks that didn't look like any language I knew. They formed a circle around the clearing, and as I watched, they seemed to shimmer slightly, as if they were damp. But when I touched, my finger came away dry. The fog began rolling back in, thicker than before. It moved like it had a purpose, curling around trees and rocks instead of just drifting. As it closed in, I thought I saw shapes moving within it, tall, thin shapes that vanished when I tried to look directly at them. I turned and ran back to the cabin. The whole time, I felt eyes on my back, watching from within that unnatural mist. When I burst through the door, Duke was waiting, barking frantically. He calmed a little when I locked the door behind me, but he kept staring out the window, tracking something I couldn't see. Night fell early, as it always does in the deep forest. But tonight it felt different. The darkness seemed hungry, pressing against the windows of my cabin like it wanted to get in. I loaded my pistol and placed it on the table beside my bed. The rifle I kept closer. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight, but I needed to rest. Tomorrow, I'd need to figure out what was happening in my woods. As I drifted off, I could swear I heard a woman's voice calling my name from somewhere in the mist. It sounded exactly like Eleanor. I woke with a jolt, heart pounding. Eleanor's voice still echoed in my mind, but the cabin was silent except for Duke's heavy breathing from his spot on the floor. The clock said 3:17 a.m., the darkest part of night. Something had woken me, a sound, a feeling, I wasn't sure. I reached for my rifle and moved to the window. The moon was nearly full, casting a pale light over everything. The fog had pulled back during the night, hovering at the tree line like it was waiting for something. But that wasn't what made my skin crawl. All around my cabin, about 30 feet out in every direction, were those same strange symbols I'd seen on the trees in the forest. but these were carved into the dirt itself, forming a perfect circle around my home. They hadn't been there when I went to sleep. Someone or something had been outside my cabin while I slept, moving silently enough that not even Duke had heard them. As I watched, the mist began to creep forward again, sliding over the ground like spilled milk. It stopped exactly at the line of symbols, as if it couldn't cross them. Duke was awake now, standing beside me with his hackles raised. He made a sound I'd never heard before. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine. It was the sound of an animal faced with something it doesn't understand. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. Through the glass, I could see frost forming on the outside of the window, spreading in delicate patterns despite the relatively warm October night. My breath fogged the glass from the inside, and for a moment I couldn't see clearly. When I wiped it away, I saw something that made my blood freeze. There was a figure standing at the edge of the trees. Tall and impossibly thin, it moved on all fours, despite having a shape that resembled a human. Its joints bent in ways that made no sense, like they could turn in any direction. I blinked, and it was gone. But then I caught movement from the corner of my eye. When I turned my head slightly, I could see it again, not directly, but in my side vision. More than one now. 3, maybe 4 of them, moving along the edge of the symbols in the dirt. Duke saw them too. He backed away from the window, pressing against my legs. I grabbed my flashlight and, against my better judgment, opened the door just enough to shine the beam toward the figures. The light passed through them like they were made of smoke, but it cast shadows, multiple shadows from each figure, stretching in different directions, as if the light was coming from several places at once. Where the light touched the mist, it seemed to part, revealing more of those thin, wrong-looking shapes moving within. They left behind a sparkling substance on the ground, like frost but crystalline. As I watched, these crystals vanished into the air without melting. I closed the door quickly and locked it. My hands were shaking. The radio on my table suddenly clicked on by itself. Through bursts of static, I heard a voice, Eleanor's voice, saying my name over and over. "Frank, Frank, help me, Frank." Duke began barking furiously at the radio. I grabbed it and pulled out the batteries, but it kept playing for several seconds before finally going silent. I sat at my table, rifle across my lap, trying to make sense of what was happening. These weren't animals. They weren't people either. Whatever was out there in the mist was something else entirely. When morning finally came, the fog had retreated again, but not as far as before. It hung around the edges of my clearing like a wall. The symbols in the dirt were gone, erased by something during the night. I needed to know more. If I was going to survive this, I had to understand what I was facing. I packed a small bag with supplies, matches, water, jerky, my compass, though I doubted it would work, and my Kodak camera. Duke watched me with anxious eyes. "We're going to the ranger station," I told him, though I knew it was a 3-day hike even in good conditions. With the fog and whatever was hiding in it, I wasn't sure we'd make it. But staying here, waiting for those things to figure out how to get past whatever protection the symbols had provided, wasn't an option. As we stepped outside, Duke pressed close to my side. The forest that had been my sanctuary for 4 years now felt like enemy territory. Even the air felt wrong in my lungs, too cold, too heavy. We headed west, away from the thickest part of the fog. I had mapped a route to the ranger station that followed ridge lines where fog usually didn't reach. But as we climbed the first slope, I looked back and saw tendrils of mist following us, moving against the wind. They were hunting us now, and somewhere in that mist I could hear Eleanor calling my name. We had been hiking for about 3 hours when I realized we weren't making progress. The trees looked familiar, too familiar. I stopped and studied a large pine with a lightning scar. We'd passed it an hour ago. Somehow, we'd been walking in a circle despite following what I thought was a straight path. "This isn't right, Duke," I muttered, My compass was useless, the needle spinning randomly. The sun was hidden behind thick clouds, giving no hint of direction. Even the moss on the trees, which normally grows on the north side, seemed to be growing all the way around the trunks. I pulled out my map and tried to figure out where we were. The landmarks I normally used, unusual rock formations, a crooked tree, a small stream, all seemed to have shifted. It was like the forest itself had rearranged while we walked through it. The fog was cleverer than I thought. It wasn't just following us, it was herding us. New plan, I told Duke. We're going to the cave system. About a mile east of my cabin was a network of caves I discovered 2 years ago. They ran deep into the mountain with multiple chambers and passages. Some led to underground streams. If we could reach them, we might find shelter and a way to throw off whatever was tracking us. As we changed direction, the fog seemed to thicken in front of us, as if trying to block our path. Through breaks in the mist, I caught glimpses of those tall, thin figures moving parallel to us, always staying just out of clear sight. Duke growled constantly now, his eyes darting from one shadow to another. The forest had gone silent again. No birds, no insects, nothing but the sound of our feet on the pine needles and the strange, wet shifting of the fog. We came to a small clearing and I stopped short. In the center was a tree I'd never seen before. It wasn't just that I hadn't noticed it. I knew these woods too well for that. This tree hadn't been here before. It was ancient, with gnarled branches that twisted in unnatural ways. Its bark was black and shiny, like it was wet, but when I touched it, my fingers came away dry. Carved into the trunk was the largest of the strange symbols I'd seen, and it seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing. I took out my camera and snapped a picture. As soon as the flash went off, the fog rushed in from all sides, like it was drawn to the light. Within it, I could see dozens of those twisted figures, more than I'd seen before. But in the brief illumination of the flash, they looked different. Not solid figures at all, but masses of tiny writhing worms or tendrils shaped like people. Duke barked and snapped at the approaching mist. Where it touched his fur, it left small burns that made him yelp in pain. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted toward where I thought the caves should be. The mist chased us, moving faster than fog should be able to move. It reached out with finger-like tendrils, trying to grab us. When one brushed my arm, it burned like acid, and for a split second, I wasn't in the Adirondacks anymore. I was back in Korea, watching my unit die in an ambush. The memory was so vivid I could smell the gunpowder and blood. I stumbled but kept running. Every time the mist touched me, it pulled out another terrible memory. Eleanor coughing blood in her final days, my father's funeral, the day I got the scar on my face. It was feeding on these memories somehow, growing more solid with each one it extracted. Finally, the dark mouth of the cave appeared ahead of us. We dove inside just as the mist reached the entrance. It swirled there, not entering, as if something about the cave kept it at bay. I shined my flashlight around. We were in the main chamber, a space about the size of my cabin, with a ceiling that rose 20 feet above us. Several smaller passages led deeper into the mountain. One of them would take us to an underground stream that eventually emerged on the other side of the ridge, miles from here. But first, I needed to catch my breath and think. As my flashlight beam played across the walls, I noticed something I'd missed on my previous explorations. The walls weren't just rough stone, they had markings on them. Ancient paintings in red and black pigments showed stick-figure humans running from cloud-like shapes. In one image, a tall, thin figure emerged from the cloud, reaching for the people. These paintings were old, maybe hundreds or even thousands of years, and they showed the same things I was experiencing now. "This has happened before," I whispered to Duke, who was licking his burned paw. "Whatever these things are, they've been here a long time. As I examined the walls more carefully, I found a small shelf-like rock formation. On it was a pile of objects: a rusted knife, a broken arrow, a rotted leather pouch, and a small, rough stone carving of the black tree we'd just seen. People had taken refuge in this cave before, hiding from the same entities that were after. And now, I took out the black stone that hung around my neck, the one the Korean man had given me. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see that the markings on it matched some of the symbols painted on the cave wall. Suddenly, I felt less alone. Others had faced these creatures and survived long enough to leave warnings. Maybe those warnings contained clues about how to fight back. I settled in to study the cave paintings more carefully, with Duke keeping watch at the entrance. Outside, the mist waited patiently, occasionally sending small tendrils into the cave, only to pull them back, as if in pain. Night was falling. I could tell by the deepening darkness beyond the cave mouth. But in here, with my flashlight, and the knowledge that others had sheltered in this same spot, I felt a small spark of hope. That hope died when I heard Eleanor's voice again, this time from deep within one of the cave passages. "Frank, is that you? I'm lost, Frank. Please help me find my way back." Duke's head snapped toward the sound, his ears perked up. He knew that voice too. "It's not her, boy," I said, gripping my rifle tighter. "It's not her," but some part of me wanted desperately to believe it was. "Frank, please, I'm scared." Eleanor's voice echoed from the dark tunnel to our right. I knew it couldn't be her. Eleanor was dead. I'd buried her myself. Whatever was calling me was using her voice like bait in a trap. But Duke whined, looking between me and the tunnel entrance. He had loved Eleanor too. "Stay, Duke," I ordered, but he was already moving toward the sound, tail wagging hesitantly. "No!" I grabbed for his collar, but he slipped away, trotting into the darkness after the voice. I had no choice but to follow. I checked my rifle, clicked on my flashlight, and entered the tunnel. It narrowed quickly, forcing me to bend over as I walked. The walls were wet, dripping with water that collected in small pools on the ground. The air grew colder the deeper we went. "Duke!" I called, my voice bouncing off the stone walls. "Come back, boy!" I heard him barking up ahead, the sound echoing. Strangely, then came a yelp of pain that made my blood run cold. I rushed forward, no longer caring about being careful. The tunnel opened into a small chamber with a pool of water in the center. Duke stood at the edge of the pool, hackles raised, facing something on the other side. My flashlight beam caught it, a swirling column of mist that had somehow gotten into the cave. Within it was a shape that made my heart stop. It looked like Eleanor, or a twisted version of her. Her face was recognizable but stretched too long. Her eyes were just empty black holes. Her mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, revealing nothing but darkness inside. "Frank," it said in Eleanor's voice. "Why did you let me die, Frank?" Duke lunged at it, teeth bared. His jaws snapped shut on the misty form, and where they connected, the mist pulled back as if in pain. The thing screeched, a sound no human could make, and the mist around it thickened, wrapping around Duke. "No!" I shouted, raising my rifle. But I couldn't shoot without hitting Duke. Duke was fighting hard, his teeth finding something solid within the mist to grip onto. The creature thrashed, losing its Eleanor shape and becoming more like the thin, wrong-jointed things I'd seen outside, where Duke's teeth broke its skin, if you could call it that. A glowing blue liquid spilled out that turned to steam upon hitting the ground. I lunged forward with my hunting knife, stabbing at the creature. The blade passed through the mist, but hit something solid. More of the blue liquid gushed out, burning my hand where it touched me. The pain was nothing compared to what I felt when I saw the mist envelop Duke completely. He was still fighting, still growling, but I could see burns appearing on his fur where the mist touched him. And worse, he was getting thinner, as if the creature was pulling something out of him. I remembered the deer carcasses, empty husks with nothing inside. "Let him go!" I screamed, slashing wildly with my knife. The black stone around my neck began to grow warm. As it touched my skin, the mist recoiled away from me, creating a small, clear space. On instinct, I tore the necklace off and pressed the stone against the thickest part of the mist where Duke was trapped. There was a sound like air rushing out of a balloon, and the creature released my dog, pulling back to the far wall of the chamber. Duke collapsed to the ground, his breathing shallow. Large patches of his fur were gone, the skin underneath red and blistered. His eyes, when they found mine, were cloudy. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, gathering him in my arms. "I've got you." The mist creature wasn't done. It changed shape again, becoming more solid. Now it looked like one of those tall, thin figures, but clearer than I'd seen before. Its skin was like pale fog given form. Its face had no features except 3 black holes where eyes and mouth should be. It moved toward us, reaching out with long clawed fingers. The stone in my hand grew hotter, and the creature kept its distance, but I could tell it was gathering strength. Duke stirred in my arms. With what seemed like a massive effort, he raised his head and looked at the creature. Then, before I could stop him, he pulled away from me and launched himself at it one more time. "Duke, no!" But he was already in the air. His teeth sank into what would be the creature's throat, and this time he didn't let go. The creature thrashed wildly, clawing at Duke with those 3-fingered hands, leaving deep gashes in his sides. I grabbed my rifle and fired, again and again, emptying the clip into the creature. The bullets seemed to pass through it, but each shot made it jerk and weaken slightly. Duke kept his grip, even as the mist began to envelop him again. I could see he was getting weaker, but he wouldn't let go. With the last bullet, something changed. The creature let out that terrible scream again, and suddenly the mist throughout the chamber began to rush toward it, as if being sucked in. The solid form collapsed, melting into a puddle of that strange blue liquid. Duke fell to the ground beside it. He wasn't moving. I ran to him, dropping to my knees. "Duke! Duke! Stay with me!" His eyes opened slightly. His tail gave 2 weak thumps against the stone floor. Then he went still, his loyal eyes fixed on nothing. My friend, my protector, was gone. I sat there holding him for a long time, tears flowing freely down my face. Duke had saved my life twice now, once in Korea and again in this cave, but I couldn't stay. The blue liquid was already starting to reshape itself, tendrils of mist forming above it. I gently laid Duke down and placed my jacket over him. Then I took the black stone, which had cooled again, and put it back around my neck. "Thank you, boy," I whispered. "I'll make it count." I gathered my pack and knife, picked up my empty rifle, and headed deeper into the cave system. I knew now that bullets wouldn't kill these things, but the black stone hurt them, and Duke's teeth had been able to wound them. There had to be a way to fight them, and if there was, I would find it, for Duke, for Eleanor, and for myself. As I left the chamber, I could have sworn I heard the soft padding of paws following me. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there but shadows and stone. The deeper caves were colder and darker than the outer chambers. My flashlight beam seemed weaker here, barely cutting through the thick darkness. Water dripped constantly from the ceiling, and the sound of my footsteps echoed off the walls. I kept moving, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the place where Duke had died. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything I'd seen. These creatures, whatever they were, could take different shapes. They could look like mist or form themselves into something more solid. They could mimic voices. They fed on memories and emotions, especially fear. And somehow they drained the life out of their victims, leaving nothing but empty shells. But they had weaknesses too. The black stone repelled them. Duke's teeth had hurt them, and they couldn't cross certain symbols. Like the ones that had appeared around my cabin, I stopped to rest in a small chamber where an underground stream cut across the floor. The water was ice cold and clean. I filled my canteen and splashed some on my face, trying to clear my head. As I sat with my back against the wall, I pulled out my journal and started writing everything down. What the creatures looked like, how they behaved, what had hurt them. The simple act of putting pen to paper helped me think more clearly. I studied the black stone in the beam of my flashlight. It was roughly oval-shaped, about the size of a quarter, with those strange symbols carved into its surface. I remembered what the old Korean man had told me when he gave it to me. It keeps away evil things that walk in darkness. At the time, I thought he was just being superstitious. Now I wondered if similar creatures existed in the mountains of Korea. Maybe these things were all over the world, hunting in remote places where people were vulnerable and alone. I had 6 bullets left for my pistol, a hunting knife, some rope, matches, and the stone. Not much to fight with, but I'd faced worse odds in Korea. After a few hours of rest, I continued deeper into the cave system, following the underground stream. According to my explorations in better times, this stream eventually emerged from the mountain about 4 miles from my cabin, near a rock formation I discovered last year. The formation had always struck me as odd. 7 tall stones arranged in a rough circle on top of a small hill. They were covered in weathered carvings, similar to the symbols I'd been seeing. I'd thought they were left by Native Americans, but now I wondered if they had a more specific purpose. Maybe they were meant to contain these mist creatures, like the symbols that had appeared around my cabin. A plan began to form in my mind. I couldn't kill all these things with just a pistol and a knife, but maybe I could trap them somehow, using the stone formation and what I'd learned about the symbols. The cave passage gradually sloped upward and the ceiling got higher. The air felt fresher too, suggesting I was nearing an exit. But when I rounded a bend in the passage, I stopped short. The walls here were covered in more cave paintings, but these were different from the ones I'd seen before. They showed people standing in a circle around the stone formation I'd been thinking about. In the center of the circle was a large black shape, like a tree. Lines radiated from the people to the tree, as if they were connected to it somehow. And on the ground beneath the painting were objects, dozens of them. Old, rusted knives, arrowheads, bits of broken pottery, animal bones carved with symbols, wooden figurines blackened with age, offerings or weapons. I knelt to examine them. Many of the metal objects were made of the same dark material as my stone. When I picked up one of the knives, it felt unusually heavy in my hand, and the air around it seemed to shimmer slightly. I slipped it into my belt alongside my regular hunting knife. The cave painting showed something else too. A figure lying beneath the black tree, with red streaks coming from it. A sacrifice. I hoped there was another way. As I studied the wall, I felt a cold draft on the back of my neck. Turning, I saw a small opening in the opposite wall that I hadn't noticed before. Fresh air was coming from it. I squeezed through and found myself in a narrow passage that climbed steeply upward. After about 50 feet of careful climbing, I emerged onto a ledge halfway up the mountain. Night had fallen outside, but the sky was clear. Stars shone brightly overhead, and a full moon cast silver light across the forest below. From this height, I could see for miles. What I saw made my blood run cold. The mist had spread. It covered most of the valley now, a vast sea of glowing, white fog that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Within it, I could make out hundreds of those tall, thin figures moving about. They were gathering, preparing for something, and in the center of it all, rising above the mist, was the black tree. It hadn't been there before. I would have noticed something that big. It had to be at least 100 feet tall, with branches that twisted and reached like arms toward the sky. I looked in the direction where I thought my cabin should be. It was completely swallowed by the mist now. So was the path to the ranger station. My only chance was to reach that stone formation and somehow use it against these creatures. From my vantage point on the ledge, I could see it. The circle of 7 stones on top of a small hill about 2 miles away. The mist surrounded the hill, but hadn't climbed up it yet. I plotted my course carefully. If I stayed high on the ridge, I might be able to avoid the worst of the mist, but I'd have to be quick. The mist was spreading, climbing higher up the mountainsides with each passing hour. With one last look at the nightmare landscape below, I shouldered my pack and began making my way along the ridge. The black stone around my neck felt warm against my skin, as if warning me of dangers ahead. I had lost Duke, I had lost Eleanor, I had lost my home. But I wasn't going to lose this fight, not if I could help it. Moving along the ridge was harder than I expected. The rocks were slippery with frost, despite the season. Every time the mist below surged upward, the temperature dropped even more. I kept one hand on the cliff face to my right and watched my footing carefully. A fall here would send me tumbling right into the heart of that unnatural fog. As I walked, I noticed something strange. The moon was casting two shadows behind me, one normal shadow and one that seemed to move slightly differently, as if delayed by half a second. I didn't like what that might mean. After about an hour of careful progress, I came to a gap in the ridge, too wide to jump across. I'd have to climb down and then back up on the other side, which meant going through the mist. I paused, weighing my options. Going back wasn't possible. The mist had already climbed higher behind me, cutting off my retreat. I had to press forward. I took the black stone from around my neck and held it tightly in my left hand. In my right, I gripped the strange knife I'd found in the cave. Then I began climbing down toward the mist. As soon as my feet touched the fog, I felt the burning sensation again. Whispers filled my head. Not just Eleanor's voice now, but others too. My father, my army buddies who died in Korea, people I'd lost over the years, all calling me, all blaming me for failing them. I pushed through, focusing on each step. The stone in my hand grew warmer, and the mist seemed to pull back slightly around me, creating a small bubble of clear air. Halfway across the gap, I saw movement in the fog ahead. One of the tall figures was approaching, walking on all fours with those wrong-jointed limbs. As it got closer, it began to take on a more human shape. It was trying to look like Duke. The sight of my dog's form, twisted and wrong, made anger flare. Inside me, I raised the strange knife, and as the creature lunged, I slashed at it. The blade cut through the misty form like it was solid. Blue liquid sprayed from the wound, and the creature let out that terrible screeching sound. It backed away, its shape melting and reforming as it retreated into the thicker fog. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I scrambled up the other side of the gap, pulling myself onto the continuing ridge. From there, I could see the stone formation more clearly. It was about a mile away now, standing out against the moonlit sky. As I got closer, I began to make out details I hadn't noticed in my previous explorations. The 7 stones weren't just standing in a circle. They were carved to look like figures with arms raised toward the center. And in the center of the circle was a flat stone altar, its surface covered in dark stains that could only be blood. The mist swirled around the base of the hill, but didn't climb up to the stones. Something was keeping it at bay. I made my way down from the ridge, staying as high as possible until I had no choice but to enter the mist again. This time, I was prepared for the voices and the burning sensation. I pushed through, keeping the stone formation in sight at all times. When I finally reached the base of the hill, I found a path leading up, not a natural path, but one that had been deliberately made. Stone steps, ancient and worn, curved up toward the circle of standing stones. As I climbed, the air grew clearer. The mist couldn't or wouldn't follow me here. By the time I reached the top, I was completely above it, looking down on a sea of glowing white fog that covered the valley. The stone circle was more impressive up close. Each of the 7 standing stones was about 10 feet tall, carved with symbols similar to those I'd been seeing. They did look like figures, guardians perhaps, with their arms raised to hold something back, or to contain something. I approached. The altar stone, in the center. Its surface was black with centuries of stains, and carved into it was the largest and most complex symbol I'd seen yet. It looked like a tree with many branches, but the branches formed more symbols within the overall design. As I studied it, I noticed a small hole in the center of the altar. It was about the size of the black stone I carried. On a hunch, I took the stone and placed it in the hole. It fit perfectly. As soon as the stone touched the altar, all the symbols on the standing stones began to glow with a faint blue light. The mist below surged, as if angry or afraid, and those tall figures within it moved frantically, trying to climb the hill, but unable to cross some invisible barrier. A sound caught my attention, a soft scraping from behind one of the standing stones. I turned, raising the strange knife. A man stepped out from behind the stone. He was old, with deeply tanned skin and long white hair. He wore the uniform of a park ranger, but it was faded and torn, as if he'd been wearing it for years. "You found your way here," he said, his voice rough with disuse. "Good. There isn't much time." I kept the knife ready. "Who are you?" "Name's Jim Blackfoot. Used to be a ranger in these parts, long time ago." He gestured at the stone circle. "Now, I'm just the caretaker." "Caretaker of what? What is this place?" "A prison," he said simply. "Or it was, until someone broke the seal 50 years ago. Loggers, cutting trees they shouldn't have cut. Since then, I've been trying to bind them again. But the ritual requires..." He trailed off, looking at me with sad eyes. "Requires what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the cave painting. "Willing blood," he said, "and unwilling sacrifice." I looked at the altar stone with new understanding. Human sacrifice. Jim nodded. "That's how it was done centuries ago, by the people who lived here before. But I've found another way." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. This powder, made from the roots of the black tree, mixed with blood freely given, can seal the prison again. The black tree, I saw it in the mist. It wasn't there before. "It's their anchor to our world," Jim explained. "Every 7 years, when the moon is full in October, they can make it grow. Through it, they feed on the fear and pain of everything in these mountains. If we don't seal them away tonight, they'll spread beyond the valley, first to the towns nearby, then further." I thought of the cave paintings showing people connected to the tree. They feed on memories, on emotions. Jim nodded. "The strongest ones, fear, grief, guilt, the more they take, the stronger they get." I looked out at the mist that had swallowed my home. "How do we stop them?" Jim handed me the leather pouch. "The symbols must be redrawn with the powder mixed, with willing blood, but to complete the binding, something they value must be placed on the altar." "What do they value?" "A life they've already marked as their own." Jim's eyes were sad. "Someone they've touched, but who escaped. Someone carrying their mark." I remembered the burning sensation when the mist had touched me, the flashes of memory. "Me," Jim nodded. "I've been watching you, Frank Westmore. I've seen your strength, your courage. When your dog died protecting you, I knew you might be the one to finish what I couldn't." "You've been following me? For how long?" "Since you first came to these mountains, I've watched many people come and go. Most flee when the mist rises. Some become victims. A few, like you, fight back." He looked tired, worn down by years of fighting, a losing battle. "I'm too old now. The binding won't take with my blood. But you're strong. Your pain is fresh. Your will is unbroken." I thought of Duke, sacrificing himself to save me. Of Eleanor, whose memory these creatures had defiled by using her voice. Of my home now lost to the mist. "Tell me what to do," I said. The old ranger smiled sadly. "It won't be easy, and you might not survive." "I know," I said, "but I'll do it anyway." Jim worked quickly, showing me what needed to be done. First, we mixed the black powder from his pouch with water in a small stone bowl that had been hidden beneath the altar. "Now the blood," he said, "freely given. I took my hunting knife and cut my palm. The pain was sharp but clean. I let my blood drip into the bowl, mixing with the black powder until it formed a thick paste. We need to redraw the symbols on each of the 7 stones, Jim explained. The old marks have faded over time. That's partly why the binding is weak. Below us, the mist churned angrily. It rose higher up the hill, testing the invisible barrier that kept it from the stone circle. The tall figures moved within it, more of them now, gathering around the base of the hill. They know what we're doing, I said. Jim nodded grimly. They'll try to stop us. The barrier weakens as the moon reaches its peak. He looked up at the night sky. We have less than an hour. We split up, each taking half of the paste mixture. I started redrawing the symbols on the eastern stones, while Jim worked on the western ones. The paste seemed to glow faintly as I applied it, the symbols coming alive under my fingers. As I worked, I noticed something disturbing. The mist was finding ways to seep through tiny gaps in the barrier, small tendrils creeping up between the stones like searching fingers. "Jim!" I called out. "The mist is getting through." "Keep working," he shouted back. "We need all 7 stones marked before we can strengthen the barrier." I moved faster, my hands shaking slightly as I copied the complex patterns. 3 stones. Done. Then 4. The mist tendrils grew thicker, reaching higher up the hill. When I finished my 4th stone, I heard Jim cry out in pain. I turned to see him on his knees, a tendril of mist wrapped around his ankle. Where it touched him, his skin blackened and withered. I ran to him, knife in hand, and slashed at the misty tendril. It recoiled, releasing Jim's leg, but more tendrils were pushing through now, reaching for both of us. "The binding powder," Jim gasped, his face gray with pain. "Finish the symbols." I grabbed his bowl of paste and continued the work, moving from stone to stone as quickly as I could. The mist tendrils followed me, trying to trip me, to touch me. Each time one got close, I slashed at it with the strange knife from the cave. Jim dragged himself to the altar, clutching something in his hand, a small leather book. "My records," he explained weakly. "Everything I've learned about them. You'll need it when this is done. When it's done, we'll both need it," I said. But we both knew that was unlikely. By the time I finished the last stone, the moon was directly overhead. All 7 standing stones now glowed with blue light, the symbols pulsing as if alive, but it wasn't enough. The mist continued to push through, more aggressively now. The barrier was still too weak. "There's one more step," Jim said, pulling himself up to sit on the edge of the altar. "The final binding requires a life they've marked as their own." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing skin that was blackened and dead from wrist to shoulder, old burns from the mist. "They've been feeding on me for years," he said, "taking my memories bit by bit. I had hoped to be the sacrifice, but—" He looked down at his withered leg. "I'm already dying. It has to be you, Frank." I shook my head. "There has to be another way." "There is," he said, his voice stronger now. "The willing sacrifice doesn't have to die, but they have to give up. What the mist wants most." "What's that?" "Your strongest memories, your deepest emotions." Jim's eyes were sad. "Your love for Eleanor, your friendship with Duke, your pride in surviving Korea when others didn't, all the things that make you who you are." I stepped back. "You're asking me to give up my memories of them?" "Not give up," Jim clarified. "Offer. There's a chance, a small one, that you can hold on to who you are. But you have to be willing to lose it all. That's the sacrifice." The mist was surging now, multiple tendrils breaking through the barrier. In the fog below, I could see those tall figures beginning to climb the hill, pushing against the weakening. Protection of the stone circle. I thought of Duke, of Eleanor, of all I'd lost. Could I offer up my memories of them, knowing I might never remember them again? But if I didn't, these creatures would spread beyond the valley. They would take other people's loved ones, feed on other people's pain. "What do I need to do?" Jim handed me his knife, another one of those strange, heavy blades like the one I'd found in the cave. Complete the symbol on the altar with your blood. Then lie down and think of everything you love, everything you fear losing. Offer it to the binding, not to them. His voice was getting weaker. I'll try to hold them off while the binding takes effect. I took the knife and approached the altar. The central symbol there, the tree with many branches, was only partially visible through centuries of stains. I cut my palm again, deeper this time, and let my blood flow onto the stone. As my blood touched the altar, the symbol began to glow, just like the ones on the standing stones. The black stone I'd placed in the center pulsed with blue light. Jim handed me his leather book. Put this under the altar when it's done. Someone will find it someday. Someone like you. I nodded, tucking the book into my shirt. Then I climbed onto the altar and lay down, fitting my body to the ancient stone. The mist was breaking through between all the stones now, swirling around us. Jim stood guard with his knife, slashing at the tendrils that reached for me. Think of them, Jim urged. Think of everything you love, everything you fear losing. But don't fear losing it. Offer it freely to the binding. I closed my eyes and thought of Eleanor, her laugh, the way her hair smelled like lavender. How she'd hold my hand during thunderstorms, even though she was more afraid than I was. I thought of Duke, his loyalty, his bravery, the way he always seemed to know what I was thinking. I thought of my home in the mountains, the peace I'd found. There, after years of war and loss, all of it, every memory, every feeling I offered up, not to the hungry mist, but to the ancient binding that might stop it. Around me, the standing stones began to hum with power. The blue light grew brighter, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. The symbol beneath me burned hot against my back. The mist surged one final time, breaking through completely. The tall, misshapen figures poured into the circle, moving toward the altar. Jim fought bravely, his knife flashing in the blue light. But there were too many. One of the creatures caught him, its misty form wrapping around him. I heard him cry out once, then go silent. The creatures surrounded the altar, reaching for me with long, clawed hands. But they couldn't touch me. The symbol beneath me had created a barrier of its own, a small, glowing dome of protection. I offer this freely, I whispered, feeling the memories beginning to slip away. Eleanor's face was fading. Duke's bark became distant. Even my name seemed to belong to someone else. The creatures screeched in frustration, pushing against the barrier. One of them, larger than the others, pushed its face against the glowing dome, its empty eyes just inches from mine. And then, something unexpected happened. As my memories faded, they appeared around me, glowing images of Eleanor, of Duke, of my cabin. But instead of being pulled into the mist creatures, they were drawn into the stone beneath me, into the binding itself. The largest creature howled in rage, its form shifting rapidly as it tried to break through. It took on Eleanor's shape, then Duke's, then my own, trying to confuse me, to make me hesitate, but it was too late. The binding was taking hold. The mist began to swirl around the stone circle, faster and faster, forming a whirlwind of fog and blue light. The creatures were being pulled into it, their forms stretching and tearing as they fought against the pull. The stone beneath me grew hotter. The black stone at the center of the altar pulsed so brightly it hurt to look at. My body felt light, as if I might float away at any moment. As the last of my memories slipped away, darkness closed in from the edges of my vision. The last thing I saw was the largest mist creature being torn apart, its form dissolving into the swirling vortex of light and fog. Then, everything went black. I woke to sunlight on my face. My body ached all over, like I'd been beaten. When I tried to move, every muscle screamed in protest. I was still on the altar stone, but something was different. The stone circle looked older somehow, more weathered. Vines had grown partway up the standing stones. Small bushes had sprouted between them. How long had I been here? I sat up slowly, my head pounding. The symbols on the altar and standing stones were no longer glowing, but they were clearly visible, dark against the grey stone, as if freshly carved. The black stone that had been in the centre of the altar was gone. I looked around for Jim, but there was no sign of him. Just a pile of empty, tattered ranger clothes near one of the standing stones. With effort, I climbed down from the altar. My legs were weak, barely able to support me. I felt hollow inside, like something important was missing. When I tried to remember how I'd gotten here, my mind hit a blank wall. I knew my name was Frank Westmore. I knew I'd been in the Korean War. I had a cabin somewhere in these mountains. But everything else was hazy, like trying to recall a dream after waking. The fog was gone. From the top of the hill, I could see clear across the valley. The forest looked normal, green and peaceful in the morning light. Birds sang, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. But something was wrong with the light. The angle of the shadows, the color of the sunlight. It wasn't October anymore. It looked like spring. I made my way down the stone steps, moving carefully on my weak legs. At the bottom of the hill, I found a small backpack that wasn't mine. Inside was a water bottle, some dried food, a compass, and a map with a route marked in red pen. Someone had left it for me. But who? I opened the water bottle and drank deeply, not realizing how thirsty I was until the water touched my lips. Then I studied the map. The route led from the hill to a small town about 15 miles away. A note in the margin read, "Ranger Station, ask for Sarah." With no better options, I shouldered the pack and began walking, following the map. As I walked, I tried to piece together my scattered memories. I remembered my cabin. I remembered having a dog, but I couldn't recall its name or what it looked like. I'd been married once, but my wife's face was a blur in my mind. Most concerning was the gap in my memory. The last clear thing I remembered was being in my cabin, hearing a weather report about unusual fog. After that, nothing until waking. Up on the stone altar, the hike to town took all day. My body grew stronger as I walked, but my memories didn't return. By sunset, I reached the edge of a small town I didn't recognize. The ranger station was easy to find, a wooden building with a green roof at the end of the main street. Inside, a young woman in a ranger uniform looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, then her eyes widened. "Wait, are you Frank Westmore?" I nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" She stood quickly. "I'm Sarah Blackfoot. My grandfather. Jim told me to watch for you." Jim. The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Jim Blackfoot. He was a ranger here years ago. She studied my face. "You really don't remember him, do you?" "I'm sorry. I seem to have lost some of my memories." Sarah nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Sit down, Mr. Westmore. We have a lot to talk about." She brought me coffee and a sandwich, then pulled out a leather-bound book that looked vaguely familiar. This was my grandfather's journal. He left it for you, along with instructions. She opened it to a marked page. "He knew you'd come down from that hill someday, with your memories gone. What happened to me up there? What day is it?" Sarah hesitated. "It's April 15th, 1964. I nearly dropped my coffee. "That's impossible. It was October when I trailed, off unable to finish the thought. "October 1963, she finished for me. 6 months ago. You've been missing all that time. Search parties looked for weeks, but they never found you." She pushed the journal toward me. "My grandfather's last entry was in November. He went up to the stone circle and never came back. The only things they found were his clothes and this journal, hidden under the altar stone." I opened the book with trembling hands. Inside were detailed notes about the mist, the creatures within it, and the stone circle. Jim had been studying them for decades, recording every appearance of the mist, every disappearance in the area. The final pages were addressed directly to me. "Frank, if you're reading this, then the binding worked. The entities are sealed away. Again, at least for now. The price was high, your memories and likely my life. but it was worth it to stop them from spreading beyond the valley. You won't remember me. You won't remember what happened or what you did. That's part of the sacrifice. But know this, your courage saved countless lives. The binding will hold for 7 years. Then the mist will return, drawn to the black tree that will grow again when the stars align. Someone will need to renew the binding. I've left all the information you'll need in these pages. Your cabin still stands, though the forest around it may be changed. The key is with this journal. One last thing. Look in the small pocket at the back of this book. I turned to the back and found a small leather pocket. Inside was a photograph I didn't recognize. A woman with dark hair and a kind smile, standing on the porch of what must have been my cabin. Written on the back was a single word. Eleanor. My wife. I couldn't remember her face, but seeing the photograph made my chest ache with a grief I couldn't quite feel. There was something else in the pocket too, a leather cord with a ring hanging from it. A wedding ring, and beside it a small, smooth black stone with strange symbols carved into its surface. As I touched the stone, a single memory flashed through my mind, a German shepherd standing protectively in front of me, facing something in a swirling mist. The dog's name came to me suddenly. Duke. Are you okay? Sarah asked, concerned. I nodded, closing my hand around the stone and the ring. I will be. Over the next few days, Sarah helped me piece together what had happened. According to Jim's journal, the mist and its creatures had been appearing in the valley for centuries, always in 7-year cycles. Native tribes had built the stone circle long ago to contain them, passing down the knowledge of the binding ritual through generations. When settlers drove the tribes away, that knowledge was nearly lost. Jim had pieced it together from old stories and his own encounters with the mist. The binding I had completed would hold for 7 years. After that, someone would need to renew it. My grandfather believed it had to be someone the mist had marked, Sarah explained. Someone who survived contact with them, like me. A week later, I hiked back to my cabin. It was still standing, though, weathered by the harsh mountain winter. Inside, everything was covered in dust, but otherwise untouched. It felt familiar but strange, like a home that belonged to someone else. I cleaned it up and settled back into a routine. Hunting, fishing, chopping wood. Simple tasks that didn't require missing memories. Sometimes, when I held the black stone, brief flashes would come back to me. Duke barking at something in the fog, a cave with ancient paintings, a circle of stones on a hilltop. But Eleanor remained a photograph, a name without memories attached. I kept her picture on my bedside table and her ring on the cord around my neck, hoping that someday I might remember the sound of her voice or the touch of her hand. Months passed. I began keeping my own journal, recording everything I could remember, and everything I learned from Jim's notes. I started exploring the valley again, mapping the caves, the ridges, the stone circle, preparing for when the mist would return. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I heard a sound. From the edge of the trees, a soft whine like a dog. When I looked up, I thought I saw a German shepherd standing there watching me, but when I called out, it vanished into the shadows. Just my imagination, I told myself, a product of my fragmented memories. But sometimes, when the night is dark and the wind whispers through the trees, I feel like I'm not alone here. Not quite. And I wonder if sacrificing my memories was truly the end of it, or just the beginning of something else. 6 years have passed now. In the distance I can see the stone circle on its hill. The symbols I carved there are still clear and dark against the grey stones. The binding holds, but last week I noticed something new. A sapling has sprouted in the center of the valley, its bark unnaturally black. Its branches twist in strange ways, reaching toward the sky like arms. Check it every day. It grows too fast, already taller than a man. Birds won't land on it. Animals won't go near it. I've started preparing using Jim's notes and my own observations. I've gathered the ingredients for the binding powder. I've practiced the symbols until I could draw them in my sleep. In my pocket, I carry the black stone, warm against my skin. Next October, when the moon is full, I'll climb that hill again. I'll renew the binding. I'll offer up what little I have left. The few memories I've managed to recover, the life I've rebuilt here. And maybe this time, I'll remember why. My name is Victor Reyes. I'm 38 years old, and for the past year I've called this tiny research cabin in the middle of nowhere my home. Most people would go crazy living this far from civilization, but for me and my dog Samson, it's exactly what we needed. Let me tell you about this place. I'm deep in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, surrounded by trees so tall they block out most of the sky. These aren't just any trees, they're ancient Douglas firs and western red cedars, some older than the United States itself. In the morning, when sunlight fights its way through the leaves, it makes beautiful spotty patterns on the ground. The whole forest floor is covered in thick, soft moss that feels like nature's carpet. My little cabin sits in a small clearing next to Thunder Creek, which provides both the peaceful sound of running water and helps power my tiny hydro generator. Between that and a few solar panels on the roof, I have just enough electricity to run my research equipment and a small fridge. It's not much, but it's all I need. This morning started like most others. I woke up to the sound of birds singing and rain tapping on the metal roof. That smell after it rains, like the earth is taking a deep breath, filled my lungs as I stepped onto the porch with my coffee. Samson, my red heeler dog, was already outside, sniffing around the edge of the clearing. "What do you think, boy? Another day of samples?" I asked him. Samson looked up and wagged his tail. "He's been my best research assistant since I came. Out here, I wasn't always a hermit living in the woods. I used to have a real job at the EPA, studying environmental impacts. That was before I reported a major corporation for dumping chemicals and covering it up. Instead of being rewarded for doing the right thing, I was pushed out, blacklisted. Nobody in my field would touch me after that, but that's not the worst of it. 2 years ago, during a terrible storm, my research assistant Ellie died while we were collecting samples. I keep telling myself I could have prevented it if I'd been more careful, if I'd checked the weather reports more thoroughly. The weight of that guilt follows me everywhere. After that, this isolated post seemed perfect. Nobody bothers me here. I can continue my research without office politics or corporate pressure. Just me, Samson, and the endless trees. I picked up my old leather journal from the table. Its pages are filled with 15 years of observations about strange ecological patterns. People think nature follows predictable rules, but I've documented hundreds of exceptions, things science can't easily explain. As I flipped through the pages, my right hand ached. The scars from a chemical burn years ago still limit how well I can move my fingers, another reminder of past mistakes. Today, something felt off. The barometer on my wall showed pressure dropping fast, which was strange because the sky looked mostly clear. And while I was checking samples yesterday, I noticed something odd, bright orange fungi growing on some trees in perfect circles. Not random patterns like normal growth, but perfect circles. I decided to investigate further. Grabbing my backpack, sample kit and walking stick, I called Samson and headed into the forest. "Come on, boy. Let's see what's going on out there." As we walked deeper among the massive swaying trees, I heard an elk call in the distance. But something about it sounded wrong, like it was coming from underwater or from inside the ground. Samson heard it too and stopped walking, his ears perked up. That's when I saw it, the first tree with a hollow, not just any hollow like you'd see from rot or woodpeckers. This was different. A perfectly round, smooth tunnel running right through the center of a massive cedar, from roots to top. It looked like someone had taken a giant drill to it, but there was no sawdust, no debris, just a clean, empty tunnel through living wood. I reached into my pocket and felt the small wooden charm an old Maka tribal elder had given me last year when I first arrived. "Beware the hollow ones," he'd told me. I had smiled politely at the time, assuming it was just local folklore. Now, staring at this impossible hole through solid wood, his warning didn't seem like just a story anymore. Took out my camera and snapped a few pictures of the hollow tree. Weird doesn't even begin to describe it. How could something bore through a tree like this without leaving any sawdust or wood chips, and so perfectly round too? "What do you think, Samson?" I asked, but my dog just whined and backed away from the tree. That was odd. Samson loves exploring, but he refused to get anywhere near this hollow cedar. I pulled out my field journal and jotted down notes about the tree, the date, time, and exact location. Being thorough is a habit I can't break. As a scientist, details matter, even when what you're seeing makes no sense. The wind picked up a bit, making the forest canopy sway above me. That's when I noticed something else strange. The trees were moving in a way that didn't match the wind direction, almost like they were swaying to their own rhythm. I decided to set up one of my wildlife cameras on a nearby trunk, pointing it toward the hollow tree. Maybe I could catch whatever was making these perfect tunnels. "Come on, boy. Let's check out a few more spots before heading back." We spent the next few hours hiking through my research area. I found 3 more trees with the same perfect hollows. Each time, Samson refused to approach them. Smart dog. At Thunder Creek, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The water had developed a strange, rainbow-colored sheen on the surface, like oil, but I know oil when I see it, and this wasn't oil. It moved differently, almost with purpose, forming and reforming patterns as it flowed. I took a sample in a glass vial and held it up to the light. The liquid seemed normal, but that sheen on the surface, I'd need to test it back at the cabin. By late afternoon, dark clouds had rolled in, and I decided to head back. The forest felt different somehow, quieter. The usual bird calls and squirrel chatter had stopped. When we reached the clearing around my cabin, I stopped dead in my tracks. Surrounding my home in a perfect circle was a ring of dead vegetation. Every plant, grass, weeds, moss, small bushes, was brown and withered, but only in a circle about 10 feet wide. Everything outside the circle was healthy and green. "What the hell?" I whispered. This wasn't here this morning. Inside the cabin, I went straight to my microscope. The creek sample looked normal under low magnification, but when I increased the power, I saw something impossible. The cells in the sample were rearranging themselves as I watched, forming geometric patterns and then dissolving back into random arrangements. I checked the wildlife camera footage from last week. Nothing unusual at first. Birds, squirrels, a few deer. But then I noticed something odd about the deer. They were moving in perfect unison, like dancers following the same routine. 5 deer stepping exactly the same way at exactly the same time. That's not natural behavior. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped and the forest was too quiet. Even the creek seemed to be flowing silently. Samson paced around the cabin, growling at the walls occasionally. Around 3 a.m. I heard it, a soft pulsing sound coming from outside. It wasn't quite a heartbeat, more like the sound of something expanding and contracting. I grabbed my flashlight and looked out the window. The circle of dead vegetation around my cabin had expanded, now about 15 feet wide, and at the edge of the circle, the moss on the ground was moving, pulsing, rising and falling like it was breathing. I switched on my audio recorder and placed it near the window. Sometimes my equipment can pick up sounds I can't hear with my ears alone. By morning, the moving moss had disappeared, but the dead circle remained, now even wider. I played back the audio recording and heard something that made my skin crawl. Below the normal forest sounds was a pulsing hum, rising and falling in a pattern that seemed almost like language. When I mapped out where I'd found the hollow trees on my area chart, they formed a perfect pentagon around my cabin. That can't be coincidence. I pulled out my satellite phone to call my contact at the Forest Service. No signal. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. My isolation, which had felt like freedom for so long, now felt like a trap. Later that day, while checking the area, I found footprints. At least they looked like footprints at first glance. But on closer inspection, they were all wrong. Too many toes, bent at impossible angles, deeper on one side than they should be. Whatever made these tracks wasn't human. Wasn't like any animal I've ever studied either. That night, I slept with my rifle next to my bed for the first time since coming here. Samson stayed awake, his eyes fixed on the door, growling softly until dawn. Something is happening in my forest. Something I can't explain with science, yet. But I will figure it out. That's what I do. I just hope I can understand it before it's too late. I woke up early after a terrible night's sleep. My dreams were filled with trees that could walk and whispers coming from underground. I made coffee and checked the dead circle around my cabin. It had grown another 3 feet overnight. Whatever was happening, it was getting worse fast. "Come on, Samson," I said, grabbing my backpack. "We need to check those hollow trees again." As we approached the first hollow tree I'd found, I noticed something new, something that made me stop in my tracks. From inside the perfectly round tunnel, a thick, honey-colored substance was oozing out. It was almost transparent, like amber, but softer, and it seemed to glow faintly, even in the daylight. "Stay back," I told Samson, who needed no encouragement. He was already backing away, his tail between his legs. I took a long stick and carefully poked at the amber goo. It moved, not like a liquid should move, but with purpose. The substance wrapped around the end of my stick, and within seconds, the wood began to look different. The amber stuff was somehow making the stick look exactly like tree bark, perfect in every detail. I dropped the stick in shock and watched as the substance retreated back into the hollow tree. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when I saw something else that turned my blood cold. About 20 feet away, a dead squirrel lay on the ground, except it wasn't completely still. Its legs were twitching, but not like a dying animal's would. They moved in coordination, like someone was testing out controls. A thin strand of that same amber substance connected the squirrel to the base of the hollow tree. I took out my camera with shaking hands and snapped photos. This was beyond anything I'd ever seen or read about in any scientific journal. The squirrel suddenly stood up, moving in jerky motions like a puppet. It turned its head toward me, but its eyes were wrong. They were filled with that amber substance, glowing slightly. "Jesus," I whispered, backing away slowly. The squirrel followed, moving in a way no living squirrel ever would. I turned and ran, Samson right beside me. We didn't stop until we reached the cabin. Inside, I tried the radio again. Still nothing but static, but now the static seemed to have a pattern to it, rising and falling like the sounds I'd recorded last night. I tried my satellite phone. Dead. I was completely cut off. I spent the afternoon looking through my microscope at a sample of moss I'd collected from the edge of the dead circle. What I saw made no scientific sense. The cells were changing, restructuring themselves while I watched. Not dying, transforming. At sunset, I walked to the edge of the clearing to check my rain gauge. That's when I heard Samson barking frantically from inside the cabin. I turned to see what had him so upset. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and in the fading light, I could see that amber substance seeping from between the trees all around the clearing. And where the moonlight touched it, the substance was forming. Shapes, arms, tentacles. I couldn't quite tell, but they were reaching upward, as if testing the air. I ran back to the cabin and locked the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. Samson was going crazy, running from window to window, barking and growling. "It's okay, boy," I lied. "We're safe in here." But even as I said it, I noticed a thin line of amber seeping under the door. I grabbed my blowtorch, part of my field, equipment for sterilizing samples, and blasted the substance. It retreated with a strange, high-pitched sound that was almost like screaming. Heat. It didn't like heat. I stayed up all night, keeping my small wood stove blazing. The amber substance tried to come through every crack in the cabin, but retreated whenever it got close to the heat. Morning came, and with it, a strange silence. The substance was gone, at least for now, but when I looked outside, the dead circle had expanded again, now just a few feet from my cabin walls. I knew I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I spent the day reviewing my notes, looking for patterns. The hollow trees formed a geometric shape around my cabin. The dead circle was expanding at a regular rate. The substance appeared most active at night. This was methodical, purposeful, intelligent. That afternoon, I heard Samson whining at the back door. When I opened it, what I saw made my heart stop. Samson wasn't alone. Another dog, exactly like him in every way, stood beside him, wagging its tail. Then I noticed the thin strand of amber connecting the second dog to the ground. Before I could react, the fake Samson lunged at the real one. They rolled on the ground, fighting. I grabbed my rifle, but I couldn't shoot. They were moving too fast, and I might hit my real dog. The fight lasted only seconds. When they separated, both dogs looked at me, wagging their tails. I couldn't tell which was which. "Samson," I called, my voice breaking. Both dogs responded, tilting their heads the same way. I remembered the charm the Maka elder had given me. He'd said it would reveal the hollow ones. I held it up, my hand trembling. One of the dogs, the one on the left, began to change. Its fur melted away, revealing that amber substance underneath. It maintained the dog shape for a moment longer, then collapsed into a puddle and slithered away into the forest. The real Samson ran to me, but I noticed something terrible. Where the fake dog had touched him during the fight, patches of his fur were now that same amber color. The substance had partially infected him. He still seemed himself, but how long would that last? As the sun set again, I knew we couldn't stay in the cabin another night. The dead circle would reach it by morning, and then what? We needed to leave, to get help, but as darkness fell, I saw the amber substances rising from the ground all around the clearing, forming a wall that cut off every escape route. We were trapped. The night was long and terrifying. Samson and I stayed, huddled near the wood stove, keeping the fire as hot as possible. The amber substance tried repeatedly to find a way in, through windows, under the door, even through tiny cracks in the cabin walls. Each time I used the blowtorch to drive it back. By morning I was exhausted but still alive. Samson looked worse. The amber patches on his fur had spread slightly, and he seemed confused at times, staring blankly at the wall before snapping back to his normal self. "We need to understand what this thing is, boy," I told him, scratching behind his ears while carefully avoiding the amber patches. "And I need to find a way to help you." I spent the morning going through all my research notes and the few books I had brought to the cabin. Nothing mentioned anything like what we were facing, but there was one book, a local history of the region, that mentioned the Maka and other tribes. There was a brief reference to forest spirits that hollow the great trees to make their homes, and a belief that these spirits consumed the essence of living things. Not much to go on, but it was a start. Around noon, I noticed something strange on my temperature readings. I'd set up sensors throughout my research area months ago, and the data was showing unusual cold spots that moved over time. When I plotted them on my map, they formed a pattern, like they were flowing toward the creek. The creek. If this thing, whatever it was, reached the water system, it could spread downstream to towns and cities. I had to stop it. Not just for Samson and me, but for everyone downstream. I looked through my supplies, searching for anything that might help. That's when I remembered the lichen samples I'd collected last week from rocks near the creek. When I'd tested them, they had unusual properties. They contained enzymes that broke down certain types of fungi and bacteria. I pulled out the samples and put a small piece under my microscope. Then I carefully added a tiny amount of the amber substance I'd collected on a glass slide. The reaction was immediate. The lichen enzymes dissolved the amber stuff completely. A weapon. I had a weapon. I spent the afternoon extracting the enzymes from my lichen samples and mixing them with water in spray bottles. It wasn't much, but it was something. The dead circle had now reached the cabin walls. Standing at my window, I could see the forest floor rippling slightly, like something was moving just beneath the surface. In the distance, more trees had been hollowed. I could see at least a dozen new ones from my window alone. I tried the radio again. Through the static, I thought I heard a voice, but then it was gone. The pattern in the static had changed, though. It seemed to be repeating the same sequence over and over, almost like it was learning how the radio worked. This thing was intelligent, and it was adapting. As the sun began to set, I had to make a decision. Stay in the cabin and eventually be surrounded completely, or try to make a run for it now, while there might still be a chance to reach the creek and prevent the spread. What do you think, Samson? Should we make a run for it? As if in answer, Samson went to the door and looked back at me, tail wagging weakly. I filled my backpack with my spray bottles of lichen enzyme, my journal, the blowtorch, and a few emergency supplies. I put on my heaviest boots and my thick forestry jacket, hoping they might provide some protection. Then I grabbed my rifle, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. All right, boy, on 3, we run for the creek. Don't stop for anything. I opened the door and immediately saw the amber substance rising from the ground all around the cabin. But it seemed thinner in one direction, toward the creek. 1, 2, 3. We sprinted across the clearing, jumping over rippling patches of ground. The amber substance reached for us, forming tendrils that tried to grab our legs. I used the blowtorch to clear a path, the flame causing the substance to retreat momentarily. We had almost reached the trees when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a perfect imitation of my own voice calling Samson's name. My dog hesitated, looking back. "Samson, no!" I screamed. "And come on." But it was too late. A large mass of the amber substance rose up behind him, taking a shape that looked horrifyingly like a distorted version of me. Samson, confused, stepped toward it. I sprayed my lichen mixture at the false me. The creature let out that same high-pitched sound I'd heard before, like screaming, and part of it dissolved. But it quickly reformed, grabbing Samson in appendages that looked like arms but were too long, too flexible. I ran back, spraying more of the mixture and using the blowtorch. The creature released Samson, who ran to me, but I could see more of the amber substance now covering nearly half his body. We made it to the trees and kept running toward the creek. All around us, the forest was changing. Trees were hollowing before our eyes. Wildlife moved in strange, synchronized patterns. The ground itself seemed to shift and flow. When we reached the creek, what I saw confirmed my worst fears. The water had that same rainbow sheen, stronger now, and where it flowed downstream, plants along the banks were already turning that amber color. This thing, whatever it was already spreading. I looked at my map. There was a place about a half-mile upstream where the creek narrowed between two large rock formations. If I could create a barrier there using the lichen enzyme, maybe I could stop it from spreading further. Come on, Samson, we're not done. Yet, as we moved upstream, I felt like the entire forest was watching us. The trees seemed to bend slightly toward us as we passed. Twice, animals tried to block our path. First a deer moving in that same jerky, puppet-like way, then a pair of raccoons with glowing amber eyes. I used the spray and the blowtorch to get past them, but my supplies were running low. When we reached the narrow point in the creek, I saw something that gave me hope. The rocks here were covered in the same type of lichen I'd used in my mixture. Nature had placed a potential barrier right where it was needed. But as I started to work, applying my remaining enzyme mixture to strengthen the natural barrier, I felt the ground trembling beneath my feet. Something big was coming. The trembling got stronger. Trees swayed even though there was no wind. I worked faster, spraying the lichen enzyme across the rocks that narrowed the creek. Samson stayed close, whimpering as the amber patches on his body pulsed with an inner light. "Almost done, boy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just need to—" A sound like tearing fabric cut through the forest, and I turned to see something emerging from between the trees. It wasn't any one shape. It kept changing, flowing from one form to another. One moment it looked like a massive deer with too many legs, the next like a bear with no face, just that glowing amber substance. Whatever this thing was, it had gathered enough mass to form something much bigger than the smaller creatures I'd seen before. I raised my spray bottle, but I knew I didn't have enough left to fight something this size. The creature paused at the edge of the creek, seeming to test the water. Where it touched, the water hissed and steamed slightly. The natural lichen was working. It didn't want to cross where the rocks were covered in it. But my instincts told me it was figuring out a way around. That's when I noticed Samson was acting strange. He was staring at the creature, his head tilted as if listening to something I couldn't hear. The amber patches on his fur were glowing brighter. "Samson," I whispered. He looked at me, and for a moment I saw recognition in his eyes. My loyal friend was still in there. Then he turned and ran straight toward the creature. "Samson, no!" But he wasn't attacking it. He stopped just short of the shifting mass and stood there, like he was communicating with it somehow. I realized with horror that the amber substance had connected him to the larger entity. He was becoming part of it. The creature began to change again, forming something new. As I watched, frozen in place, it took on Samson's shape, growing and expanding until I was looking at a giant version of my dog, 30 feet tall and made entirely of that glowing amber material. The real Samson, now almost completely covered in amber, sat at its feet like a tiny duplicate. The massive Samson thing opened its mouth and made a sound that wasn't a bark. It was deeper, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. I felt dizzy suddenly, a pressure building inside my head. The sound was doing something to me. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the creek. The water splashed my hands, and where it touched, my skin tingled painfully. The water was changing, too, becoming more like the amber substance. I had to finish the barrier. It was the only way to stop this thing from spreading downstream to populated areas. The giant Samson creature took a step toward me, each footfall shaking the ground. I emptied the last of my spray bottle onto the rocks, forming as complete a barrier as I could across the narrowest part of the creek. The effect was immediate. The amber sheen on the water stopped at the rocks, unable to pass. The creature let out that terrible vibrating sound again, louder this time. My head felt like it might split open. Blood trickled from my nose. The pressure was building, like the creature was trying to force its way into my mind. I saw images, the forest from above, spreading for miles, the creek flowing down to towns and cities, people drinking the water, their eyes turning that same glowing amber color. This wasn't just a forest entity. It was something ancient that had been dormant until now, something that wanted to spread, to consume, to transform everything it touched. And it was showing me its plans. I fought against the mental pressure, forcing the images away. "No!" I gasped. "You can't have them. You can't have me." The creature shifted again, the giant Samson form melting away. In its place stood something that looked almost human, but wrong in subtle ways. Too tall, arms too long, fingers too many. Its face was featureless, except for glowing indentations where eyes should be. At its feet, the real Samson was now completely covered in the amber substance, sitting unnaturally still. The human-like figure pointed at me, then at the barrier I'd created across the creek. It wanted me to remove it. "No," I said again, stronger this time. The figure tilted its head, as if confused by my refusal. Then it stepped into the creek, moving toward me. But as it touched the water near the lichen-covered rocks, parts of its legs seemed to dissolve. It retreated quickly, making that high-pitched screaming sound. I'd found its weakness, but I'd used the last of my enzyme spray. How could I stop something this size? That's when I remembered. The hydro generator back at my cabin. It used the creek's flow to generate electricity. If I could somehow overload it, I had one advantage. I knew these woods, every trail and shortcut. The creature might be powerful, but it was still learning this environment. "I'm sorry, Samson," I whispered, looking at what used to be my dog. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." Then I turned and ran, not along the creek bank where I'd be easy to follow, but up the steep slope beside it, climbing through dense underbrush where the larger creature would have trouble following. Behind me, I heard that vibrating sound again, and the pressure returned to my head. This time, the images were different. Samson and me in the cabin, happy. The two of us hiking through uninfected forest, safety and peace if I just accepted what was happening. Lies, all lies. I kept climbing, ignoring the false promises being planted in my mind. When I reached the top of the ridge, I could see my cabin below, the dead circle now completely surrounding it. The amber substance coated everything near the structure, making it look like it was sitting in a pool of glowing honey. I had to get back there, to the generator controls. But how? The direct path was completely covered. Looking around desperately, I spotted the fuel tank for my emergency generator, far enough from the cabin that it wasn't yet surrounded. If I could reach that, I half ran, half slid down the other side of the ridge, taking a wide route to approach the fuel tank from behind the cabin. As I moved, I could feel the forest watching me. Animals with glowing amber eyes tracked my progress from the trees, but they didn't attack. It was like they were herding me. When I reached the fuel tank, I unscrewed the cap and sniffed. The fuel was still good. I looked toward the cabin, just 30 yards away now. The ground between was rippling with that amber substance, like a living carpet. I couldn't walk on that. But maybe. I grabbed an empty sample container from my pack and filled it with fuel. Then I took a deep breath, lit the blowtorch one last time, and tossed the container onto the rippling ground. The fuel splashed across the amber substance and ignited immediately when it touched the torch flame. The fire spread quickly, burning away the creature's extensions and clearing a path to the cabin. I ran through the flames, feeling the heat singe my clothes and hair. The amber substance retreated from the fire, screaming in that high-pitched way. I burst through the cabin door and headed straight for the hydro generator controls. Outside, I could hear trees cracking and splintering as something large approached. The main creature coming for me. The hydro generator was simple, a turbine in the creek that generated electricity for the cabin. But it had safety features to prevent overload during high water flow. Features I was about to disable. I tore off the control panel and crossed wires that should never be crossed, bypassing every safety measure. The generator began to whine, a high-pitched sound that grew louder by the second. Looking out the window, I saw the human-like figure approaching through the flames, parts of it burning but constantly reforming. Behind it came more creatures, deer, bears, birds, all moving in that same jerky way, all with glowing amber eyes. And among them, Samson, no longer recognizable as a dog, just a dog-shaped amber thing. The generator whine rose to a scream. Sparks flew from the wiring. I knew I had only seconds. I grabbed my journal, the record of everything I'd learned, and stuffed it into a waterproof case. Then I ran to the back of the cabin, to the small cellar door I rarely used, and dropped the case into the underground storage space. The cabin walls began to shake as the generator reached critical overload. Outside, the creature had reached the porch. I had one last thing to do. I grabbed the tank of propane I used for cooking and opened the valve all the way, filling the cabin with gas. The door burst open. The human-like figure stood there, its featureless face somehow conveying rage. Behind it, I could see what used to be Samson. "You want me?" I shouted over the generator's dying scream. "Come and get me!" The creature stepped into the cabin, reaching for me with two long arms. I closed my eyes and thought of the forest as it should be, clean, natural, uninfected. Then I flicked my lighter. The world turned white. 3 weeks later, a Forest Service helicopter flew over what used to be my research station. From above, the pilot could see a perfect circle of burned forest surrounding a blackened crater where my cabin once stood. The explosion had been massive, destroying not just the cabin, but everything within 100 yards. The fire might have spread further if not for the heavy rain that started falling minutes after the explosion. Some might call that lucky. I don't believe in luck anymore. Inside the helicopter was a search team sent to investigate after I missed my monthly check-in. They landed in a clearing half a mile from the burn site and approached on foot, carefully documenting everything. "They found weird burn pattern," said one ranger, taking photos of the perfect circle. "Never seen anything like it." "No sign of Reyes or his dog," said another, looking through the ruins of the cabin. "Could have been thrown clear by the explosion. I guess they were thorough, these Forest Service people. They searched the entire area, looking for any trace of me. Eventually, they found the cellar door, partially protected from the blast by the cabin foundation. Inside was my waterproof case with my journal, all my notes and samples of the lichen I'd used against the creature. Enough information for them to understand what had happened here, if they chose to believe it. "What do you make of this?" asked one ranger, flipping through my journal. Guy was writing about some kind of entity in the forest, living in hollow trees. Sounds crazy. The senior ranger took the journal, read a few pages and frowned. Reyes was a good scientist before he got blacklisted, not the type to make up stories. He looked around at the perfect circle of destruction, then back at the journal. "Let's get these samples back to the lab and mark this area as restricted until further notice." They left, taking my research with them. What they did with it afterward, I can't say for sure. But the area remained closed to the public. No hiking, no camping. Officially, it was for ecological research purposes. 1 month after they found my journal, a specialist team returned. They brought strange equipment and spent days taking readings throughout the forest. Then they installed monitoring devices around the perimeter of the burn zone. By then, new growth had already started in the burned area. Unusually fast growth, some might say. The trees and plants looked normal enough, but no animals would enter the circle. Birds flew around it rather than over it. The team noted all this in their reports. 6 months later, a local hiker ignored the restricted area signs and wandered into my old research zone. He never came back out. The search party found his backpack near Thunder Creek, but no other trace. After that, the Forest Service doubled the security. More signs, motion sensors, regular patrols. But the forest has its ways of spreading. A seed carried by wind, spores floating downstream, a bird carrying a twig to build a nest elsewhere. 1 year after the explosion, a ranger checking the monitoring equipment saw something that made her call for immediate backup. A single tree, miles beyond the containment zone, with a perfect hollow center from roots to canopy, and at its base, a thin trickle of amber substance, catching the sunlight with a faint inner glow. The entity wasn't gone. It had just changed. Tactics. As for me, the search team was right. They never found my body. Or Samson's. Sometimes hikers in remote parts of the forest report seeing a man with a 3-day stubble and wire-rimmed glasses walking with a red heeler dog. They say the man seems to be looking for something, checking the trees, taking samples. When they try to approach, the man and dog vanish among the trees. Just a forest legend, probably. These mountains are full of them. But if you're ever hiking in the Cascades and see a tree with a perfect hollow running through it, don't touch it. Don't even get close. Turn around and head back to civilization as fast as you can. And if you hear what sounds like a dog barking or a man calling for help, don't follow the sound. Some things in these ancient forests should be left alone. Some hollows should remain unexplored, because sometimes the things we discover aren't meant to be found. And sometimes the price of knowledge is far too high. Deep in the Cascade Range, the hollowed pines are spreading, one tree at a time, one creek at a time, one forest at a time, waiting for someone curious enough to look inside, someone like you. My name is Thomas Caldwell. I'm 47 years old, and I came to this valley 3 months ago to be alone. After 20 years in Army intelligence and a tour in Korea, I needed quiet. Something went wrong during my last mission, something I'm not supposed to talk about. And now I can't sleep without seeing faces I'd rather forget. This old hunting lodge is perfect. It sits deep in northern Maine, tucked between tall mountains where no one ever comes. I found it on an old map while researching, places where people have disappeared throughout history. That might sound strange to you, but I had my reasons. The first thing I noticed when I arrived was the fog. It hangs low over everything, never fully clearing, no matter how warm or windy it gets. The trees here are giants, pines and hemlocks so thick I can't wrap my arms around them. They form a wall around this valley, like they're keeping something in or out. A dark river cuts through the middle of the valley. The water doesn't look right. It's black and shiny like polished stone. Sometimes I swear I see things moving beneath the surface, but when I look closer, there's nothing there. I keep my hair short, military style, though it's getting streaked with gray now. My body is still strong and wiry. Old habits die hard. Every morning I wake before dawn and check my supplies. I brought enough food to last a year, military gear and weapons. Out here, being prepared isn't paranoid. It's necessary. The wildlife acts strange. Deer stand completely still for hours, just watching the lodge with unblinking eyes. Ravens gather on dead trees, making calls that sound almost like words. The moss grows in perfect squares and triangles, patterns you don't see in normal nature. Night. The stars look wrong. They seem closer, brighter, and sometimes, though I tell myself it's just my eyes playing tricks, the constellations shift position. I keep a journal where I write down everything I see. It sits beside my carbine rifle, which is never far from reach. The leather cover is worn from years of use. Inside are coded notes from my time in service. Things I wasn't supposed to remember, but couldn't forget. Now it's filling with observations. About this valley, my left arm carries a strange scar, connected circles that look like a chain or maybe a molecule. I got it during that last mission, the one that went bad. Sometimes at night it burns, especially when I'm near the river. I don't sleep much anymore. When darkness falls, I walk the perimeter of the lodge, checking for I'm not sure what. My footsteps are the only sound besides the ravens and the soft gurgle of that too dark river. I came here to escape my memories, but lately I've been wondering if I was drawn here instead. There's something about this valley that feels familiar, like a word on the tip of my tongue that I can't quite remember. Today I found something that made my blood run cold. Cut into a tree not far from the lodge was a symbol. 3 circles, connected by lines, exactly like my scar. Exactly like a classified document I once saw. And that's when I knew. Whatever I was running from had found me first. I started exploring more of the valley after finding that symbol. My military training kicked in. Observe, document, analyze. That's how you stay alive in unknown territory. My compass doesn't work right here. This morning I tried to map the eastern edge of the valley, but the needle just spun in perfect circles, then stopped pointing at a rock formation instead of north. I've never seen anything like it, not even in the most remote places I've been. Equipment failure, I muttered to myself, tapping the compass. But my gear is military grade, built to work in all conditions. Something else was happening. The rock. Formations don't look natural. There are stones balanced on top of each other that should fall over in the slightest breeze. But they don't. I tried to push one. Just a small rock perched on top of a bigger one, and it wouldn't budge. It felt like it was glued down, but there was nothing there. Last night, I saw something that can't be explained away. I was sitting by the window, watching the river when the water started flowing backward. Upstream instead of down. I checked my watch. Exactly midnight during the new moon. It flowed the wrong way for 17 minutes, then suddenly switched back as if nothing happened. I'm writing everything down. My journal is filling up with notes, sketches, and questions. I've started marking locations on my map where strange things happen. They form a pattern, a circle around the lodge. This morning I found animal tracks near the river. They started as deer prints, normal enough, but halfway across a muddy patch they changed. The prints became something else, something walking on two legs with three-toed feet. I followed them until they disappeared at the water's edge. My radio picked up. A transmission yesterday, just static at first, then words. A voice, my voice, having a conversation I haven't had yet, talking about things I haven't seen. I shut it off quickly, but when I tried to record it happening again, the radio worked perfectly normal. The trees whisper at night, not the normal. Rustle of leaves in the wind. There is no wind in this valley. It's like they're talking to each other, passing messages in a language just beyond my understanding. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing my mind. My time in Korea and that classified operation left me with scars you can't see. Doctors called it PTSD, said I might hear or see things that aren't real, but these things feel different from my usual hallucinations. They feel purposeful. I woke up this morning to find the moss had grown overnight in a new pattern outside my window. Perfect circles and lines, like a mathematical equation or map coordinates. I copied it into my journal, trying to make sense of it. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The pattern matched the arrangement of my supplies inside the lodge. Items I'd carefully positioned according to military protocol. Their layout was copied exactly in the moss outside, down to the exact spacing between my radio and rifle. Something is watching me, learning my habits. And whatever it is, it knows. Things about me that no one should know. The ravens dropped small objects today, pebbles, bones, bits of metal, placing them in exact spots across the valley floor. From the high ridge, I could see they were creating a pattern, and at the center of that pattern was the hunting lodge. I'm trapped in the middle of a message I don't understand. I don't sleep much now. It feels safer to stay awake. At sunrise, today, I found perfect circles of frost on the inside walls of my bedroom. Inside, not outside. The temperature was warm, almost 70 degrees, but there they were, icy patterns that didn't melt until noon. My traps have been tampered with. I set them for rabbits and squirrels, normal food, but something's been disarming them at night, not just springing them empty, but taking them apart and rearranging the pieces into patterns. The same connected circles as my scar. This isn't coincidence, I told myself, staring at the dismantled trap. I've been a soldier long enough to know when something is deliberate. The nights are getting worse. I wake up certain someone is standing in the dark corners of the room, but when I turn on my flashlight, nobody's there. yet the floorboards are wet with river water, and I never left the lodge. Time doesn't work right here. My watch, military issue, the kind that can survive underwater or in desert heat, shows different times depending on where I stand in the valley. Near the river, it runs fast. By the large rock formation to the north, it barely moves at all. Yesterday, I spent what felt like an hour walking the perimeter, but when I checked my watch, only 10 minutes had passed. I've started marking the trees with my knife, making my own symbols, a way to fight back against whatever is happening. But this morning, I found all my marks changed, twisted into that same connected circle pattern. The cuts in the bark looked fresh, as if they'd just been made. Last night's rain left puddles across the valley floor, but they don't reflect the sky. Each puddle shows different stars, different times of day. One showed a night sky with a full moon, though it's still new moon phase. Another reflected back what looked like a solar eclipse. Don't trust what you see, I whispered to myself, a lesson from intelligence training. But what if you can't trust anything? I found a dead fox near the river today. At least it started as a fox. Its back half was still normal, but its front had changed. Scales instead of fur and too many legs bent at wrong angles. I buried it quickly and washed my hands in the river. The water felt thick, almost like syrup. My scar itches constantly now. The pattern seems to be spreading, though. I tell myself it's just my imagination. The circles look deeper, more defined. Sometimes I catch them glowing faintly in the dark, a dull silver light that fades when I look directly at it. The whispering trees have gotten louder. Last night, I could almost make out words. Caldwell, come, see. I tried the radio again, desperate to call for help. Instead of static, I heard my own voice reading back journal entries I haven't written yet, descriptions of things I haven't seen. The final transmission ended with my voice saying, "It's too late to leave now." I took apart the radio, looking for recording devices or signs of tampering. There were none. The machine was exactly as it should be, except for what it was doing. This morning, I hiked to the highest point in the valley, desperate for perspective. The fog cleared briefly, and I saw something that turned my blood cold. The entire valley floor, the trees, rocks, the winding river, formed a pattern identical to my scar. Not similar, identical. As if the valley itself had been shaped to match what was carved into my arm, or perhaps my scar was shaped to match the valley. Either way, I finally understood. I didn't choose this place by accident. Something chose me. I saw it today, or rather, I saw where it was by not seeing anything at all. I was standing by the river at dusk, watching the too dark water flow, when something emerged, not from the water itself, but from somewhere behind reality. The only way I can explain it is this. Imagine looking at a painting and suddenly noticing a hole where the paint has been scraped away. That's what I saw, a blank spot in the world, a piece of nothing that moved. Light bent around it, creating a blind spot in my vision that shifted and changed shape. "Hello," I called out instantly, regretting breaking the silence. It didn't answer with words. Instead, it made the water rise in a perfect column 5 feet high, not a drop spilling over. The column twisted into the now familiar pattern of connected circles, my scar, the valley's shape. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on it. That was my first mistake. Looking directly at it hurt my eyes and made my head pound. But when I glanced at its reflection in the river, I could see it clearly. It had no solid shape. It shifted between forms, sometimes tall and thin like a man, sometimes wide and formless like fog, sometimes breaking apart into smaller pieces that moved independently before joining back together. "What are you?" I whispered. In response, it moved toward the shore, not walking, not floating, just suddenly being closer than it was before. The air around it shimmered like heat waves off hot pavement. I ran back to the lodge, heart pounding. Inside, I locked the door and grabbed my rifle, though some part of me knew bullets wouldn't help. Through the window, I saw it stop at the edge of the clearing. It didn't try to come closer. Instead, it began arranging pine cones and stones in the dirt. When it finished, I recognized the pattern, coordinates and a code phrase from my classified mission, the one that went wrong. Information no one but my team should know. How do you know that? I shouted through the glass. The thing tilted what might have been its head. Something silver and liquid dripped from it, sizzling when it hit the ground. Where the drops landed, small flowers grew instantly, bloomed and died in seconds. I felt a strange pull toward it, like metal to a magnet. My scar burned hotter than ever before. Looking down, I saw the pattern glowing bright silver, matching the thing's dripping substance. It raised what could have been an arm and pointed directly at my scar. The trees around the clearing began to bend, not from wind, but as if gravity itself had shifted. Pine cones, rocks, and dead leaves floated upward in a gentle cloud, then suddenly dropped back to earth when the thing lowered its arm. That night, lying in bed with my rifle across my chest, I heard scratching at the lodge walls. Not like animals trying to get in, more like someone writing. In the morning, I found messages carved into the wood. Remember as you carried us here. We have always been here. The carvings matched my handwriting exactly. Through the window, I spotted a deer at the edge of the clearing. It stood perfectly still, watching the lodge. As I stared back, its form rippled and changed. For a moment, its eyes glowed with the same silver light as my scar, and I understood. It wasn't watching me. Something was watching through it. The entity could use animals as its eyes. How many creatures in this valley belonged to it now? How many times had I been watched without knowing? That afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled in. Lightning struck the valley repeatedly, always hitting the same spots, forming that pattern again. During one bright flash, I saw the entity's true shape reflected in every window of the lodge at once, a vast, branching thing that existed everywhere in the valley simultaneously. I know now why I can't leave. The scar on my arm isn't just a mark, it's a piece of the entity inside me. Last night I couldn't sleep. I dug through my old military trunk and pulled out the coded files I wasn't supposed to keep. My hands shook as I spread them across the lodge floor, connecting events that had seemed unrelated until now. 7 years ago, my team was sent to investigate a small village in Korea where every resident had reportedly gone mad overnight. They babbled about seeing impossible shapes and colors that didn't exist. We thought it was a chemical weapon test or maybe a disease. We were wrong. In the village center was a meteorite. At least, that's what we called it. A strange rock with an oily surface that moved when no one was looking directly at it. My team collected it for study. I was the one who carried the lead container. Theone, who got too close when the container cracked. The report said I was exposed to unknown radiation. They treated me for burns and contamination, but the doctor's notes mentioned something else. Patient Caldwell shows signs of molecular restructuring at the cellular level. Unknown particles appear to be dormant, not dead, waiting. The scar formed a week later, those connected circles that matched the valley's shape. It wasn't a meteorite, I whispered to the empty room. It was a piece of you, I found. An old map in the lodge basement today, dated 1820. It showed this valley with a note scribbled in the margin. The place between, do not enter. What falls here does not belong to our world. The local tribes avoided this place for centuries. Early settlers reported strange lights and people going missing. The government established a monitoring station during World War II, but abandoned it suddenly in 1943. No explanation given. My compass still spins wildly, but I've noticed a pattern. It points towards specific spots in the valley. I marked them on my map Together, they form a perfect scale model of an atom. Today, I tried something new. I took river water and put drops on different surfaces: wood, metal, cloth. On wood, it burned through like acid. On metal, it froze solid. On cloth, it seeped in and formed. Guess what? That same pattern of connected circles. This thing, whatever it is, isn't from Earth. It fell here long ago, crashed or was sent, and has been changing the valley ever since. Bending reality around itself. And now I understand why I found this place, why I was drawn here after Korea. The piece inside me, dormant they said, was trying to get back to the whole. I'm part of it now, and it's part of me. I set up a camera trap near the river, hoping to capture an image of the entity. When I developed the film, every picture showed the same thing. Me, standing by the river, even though I was at the lodge when the photos were taken. In each picture, my face was turned away from the camera. In the final shot, I was looking directly at the lens, but my eyes were solid black holes with silver light pouring out. The pictures fell from my trembling hands. It wasn't just watching through the animals. It could look like me. I spent today checking the lodge for any defensive measures left by previous occupants. In a hidden compartment under the floorboards, I found a journal from 1943, the notes of a government scientist stationed here. The last entry read, "The entity exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. What we see is merely the shadow it casts into our reality. It cannot be destroyed in our dimension because most of it exists elsewhere. It can only be contained." The journal included detailed containment protocols, symbols and arrangements that could temporarily bind the entity to one location. The scientist's final words: "I believe the valley itself is a natural containment vessel. The mountains form a geometric pattern that traps it here. If it ever escaped..." The rest of the page was torn away. Tonight, as darkness fell, I heard a voice outside, my commanding officer from the Korea mission. "Caldwell, report status." The voice was perfect, exactly as I remembered. But my commanding officer died 3 years ago. When I looked through the window, I saw a familiar silhouette at the edge of the clearing, but something about it was wrong. Its shadow didn't match its shape, and where its feet touched the ground, silver puddles formed. The entity was getting better at its disguises. It was trying to lure me out. The question was, why didn't it just come in and take me? I woke up to find frost patterns on my bedroom ceiling, beautiful connected circles and lines that formed equations I somehow understood without knowing how. The knowledge just appeared in my mind, like remembering something I'd forgotten. The entity wasn't just alien. It was ancient, older than humans, older than Earth itself. It traveled through space inside meteors and asteroids, pieces of itself scattered across galaxies. But why was it here? What did it want? I felt the answer through my scar. It was lost, separated, alone. "Like me," I whispered, touching the silver lines on my arm. I decided to risk going to the river again. The entity seemed stronger there. As I approached the black water, my watch started running backward. The air felt thick, hard to move through, like walking through honey. The surface of the river rippled before I got close. It was waiting for me. This time, I didn't run. I stood my ground as it rose from the water, not solid, not liquid, not gas, but something that shifted between all three. In the daylight, I could see more details. It reflected everything around it like a perfect mirror, except when it chose to be invisible. "Why me?" I asked it directly. "Why bring me here?" The water at my feet formed words. "You already know my scar, burned hot." The entity moved closer, and for the first time I felt no fear, only a strange sense of recognition. When it reached out, I didn't back away. Its touch was like ice and electricity together. Images flooded my mind, stars exploding, worlds forming, vast empty spaces between galaxies. I saw through its eyes, or whatever it used to see, experiencing time and space in ways humans never could. It didn't think like us. It didn't see past, present, and future as separate things. To it, time was like a landscape you could look across, seeing everything at once. That's when I understood the true danger. It wasn't evil. It wasn't good. It was simply so different from us that human concepts meant nothing to it. It could kill without malice or save without compassion. The containment protocols, I gasped as the connection broke. The government knew about you. The entity moved back slightly. Around us, stones and sticks rose from the ground, arranging themselves to form a response. They tried to use images filled my mind. Men in old-fashioned military uniforms, setting up equipment around the valley in the 1940s, trying to harness the entity's power, failing catastrophically. The valley burning with silver fire as the entity defended itself. And my mission in Korea, I said, that village, that wasn't the first piece of you they found. It confirmed with a ripple across its surface. Many pieces. Many worlds. The trees around us began to bend inward, forming a dome over our heads. Inside this space, reality itself seemed thinner. I could see faint outlines of other places overlapping our world. Ghostly mountains, strange structures, beings that hurt my eyes to look at. What happens if all the pieces come together again? I asked, already fearing the answer. The entities. Response came not in words, but in a vision. The valley tearing open like paper. A rift forming between dimensions, our reality merging with others in a catastrophic collision. I staggered back, breaking contact. The vision faded, but the truth remained. The entity in the valley was trying to become whole again. The peace in. My arm was the key it needed, a living bridge between worlds. That's why the government classified everything. They realized what they'd found wasn't just alien technology or a new weapon, it was a doorway. And they'd accidentally sent part of the key inside me right back to the lock. As I walked back to the lodge, I felt the entity watching through every animal, every puddle, every shadow in the valley. It wasn't trying to scare me anymore. It didn't need to. It was waiting for me to accept what was already happening. The scar on my arm had grown again, the silver lines now extending past my elbow. When I looked in the mirror, I saw tiny flecks of silver in my eyes. The transformation had already begun. I woke to the sound of thunder, but when I looked outside, the sky was clear. The noise came from the ground itself. The valley was shaking. Cups fell from shelves, windows rattled, and a long crack split the lodge floor from front door to back wall. Something big was happening. My radio crackled to life without me touching it. Through bursts of static, I heard geomagnetic and storm, unprecedented levels, northern Maine, communications disrupted. The piece of the entity inside me knew what this meant. The storm was weakening the barriers between dimensions, making it easier for the entity to fully enter our world. This was the moment it had been waiting for. I grabbed the old government scientist's journal and my own notes. If I couldn't stop what was coming, maybe I could contain it somehow. Outside, the air crackled with energy. The too dark river had overflowed its banks, and the black water now covered half the valley floor, reflecting a sky that wasn't ours. A purple-black expanse with 3 moons. At the center of the flooding stood the entity, larger than I'd ever seen it, no longer trying to mimic human shape. It towered above the trees, a shifting pillar of light and darkness that hurt to look at directly. The silver lines on my arm now reached my shoulder and across my chest, burning like fire. Each heartbeat sent pulses of pain through my body. I could feel myself changing, becoming something not entirely human. "I know what you want," I called out, my voice strangely calm. "You need me to complete yourself." The entity pulsed in response. Around it, reality itself seemed to thin. I could see through it to other places, desert landscapes, ocean floors, cityscapes that didn't look like any city on Earth. I felt a pull toward it, my feet dragging in the mud as if magnetized. The scar tissue burned hotter with each step closer. "If I join you," I shouted over the roar of the river, "what happens to this world?" Images flashed through my mind, worlds colliding, realities merging, humanity faced with truths they weren't ready to understand. Madness and chaos would follow as people saw things their minds couldn't process. The end of the world as we knew it. That's when I made my choice. From my pocket, I pulled out the paper where I'd copied the containment symbols from the old journal. Using a knife, I cut my palm and let blood drip onto the earth. I began drawing the symbols in the mud around me, creating a circle of protection. The entity reacted immediately. The ground trembled and trees bent as if in a hurricane. The sky darkened to night in seconds. My scar burned so badly I screamed, dropping to my knees. "You can't have all of me," I gasped. I completed the circle just as the entity launched its attack. Silver tendrils shot toward me like lightning, but they stopped at the edge of my blood-drawn symbols. Inside the circle, I was momentarily safe, but I knew the protection wouldn't last. The containment was temporary, minutes, maybe hours. That's when I remembered something from my military training about feedback loops. If two communication systems connect to each other and both try to send and receive at the same time, they overload. I had a piece of the entity in me. What if I could use that connection both ways? I focused on the scar, no longer fighting the burning. Instead, I embraced it, imagining the silver lines flowing not from the entity to me, but from me back to it. "You wanted a bridge," I said through gritted teeth. "Let's see if it works both ways." The pain was unbearable. Blood ran from my nose and ears as I forced my will through the connection. I wasn't just letting the entity in, I was pushing myself into it. My memories, my humanity, my understanding of right and wrong. I forced them through the silver lines like water through a pipe. The entity shuddered. Its perfect form wavered, becoming unstable. It hadn't expected this. To receive instead of just take. A high-pitched sound filled the valley as the entity tried to break the connection. Too late. We were linked now, two consciousnesses tangled together. I felt myself slipping away, my body growing cold as more of my mind transferred across the bridge between us. But as I faded, the entity also changed. The chaotic energy became more ordered, its movements more deliberate, more human. With my last conscious thought, I understood the truth. The only way to contain something from beyond our reality was with something from our reality, me. The storm peaked with a blinding flash, then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, everything had changed. I could see the valley from 1,000 different angles simultaneously. I could feel every raindrop, every blade of grass, every insect moving across the forest floor. I had become the valley, and the valley had become me. The entity and I were now one being, neither fully human nor fully alien. My consciousness spread through the valley like roots through soil, containing the entity's power within the natural boundaries of the mountains. I was its prison, and it was mine. Days passed, then weeks, then years. I don't experience time like I used to. Sometimes a season feels like minutes. Sometimes a single sunset lasts forever. My body still walks the valley, unchanged by the passing years. I don't age, I don't hunger, I simply am. The lodge remains my center, the place where what's left of Thomas Caldwell sleeps and wakes and watches. I maintain it perfectly, bed made, with military corners, supplies organized, journal updated daily, old habits. 10 years after the confrontation, hikers found their way into my valley. I watched them from the trees, from the river, from the eyes of ravens circling overhead. They never saw me, though I stood feet away. I've learned to exist between moments, visible only when I choose to be. They found pages from my journal I'd left scattered around the valley, breadcrumbs of my story. They took them when they left, carrying pieces of the truth back to the outside world. The government came next. Men in hazmat suits with radiation detectors and strange equipment. They set up monitoring stations around the valley perimeter. They never venture deep inside, where the river runs too dark and the trees whisper warnings. They know something happened here. They just don't know what. 37 years after I came to the valley, a researcher hiked to the highest ridge with my collected journal pages. She called out my name, asking questions about the entity, about what happened to me. I stood beside her, watching her shiver though it wasn't cold. "I'm still here," I said, my voice rusty from disuse. She turned, looking right through me at first. Then her eyes widened as I let myself become visible. I looked exactly as I had in 1954, same silver-streaked hair, same military posture, same haunted eyes. Only now, fine silver lines traced patterns across my skin like frost on a window. "Are you Thomas Caldwell?" she whispered. "Part of me is," I answered truthfully. "The rest is something else." She asked if I needed help, if I wanted to leave. I smiled at the simplicity of the question. "I am the valley now," I told her, "and it is me. We can never leave." I explained as best I could how the entity and I had merged, how my humanity had changed it and its power had changed me, how we existed in balance now, neither fully in control. "The valley is a prison," I said, "for something that doesn't belong in our world. I'm the lock on the door." "For how long?" she asked. "For as long as necessary." Before she left, I gave her my dog tags, the last piece of the old Thomas Caldwell that wasn't part of the new thing I had become. Something solid and real to prove. I existed. Now it's 1991. I've been here nearly 40 years. The monitoring stations still blink their red lights at the valley's edge. Occasionally, researchers come, but they never stay long. Something in the air, in the water, in the unnatural silence drives them away. They don't understand that I'm protecting them, that the entity, still alive within me, would destroy everything they know if it ever broke free. Sometimes, when the stars align in certain patterns, I feel the entity stirring, testing our boundaries. The silver lines on my skin burn, and I have to exert my will to maintain the balance. On those nights, strange lights dance above the valley, and the river flows backward for hours. I walk the perimeter on nights like those, a guardian at the edge of reality. The ravens follow me, their eyes glinting silver in the moonlight. Yesterday, I heard the sound of helicopter blades. Looking up, I saw a military aircraft circling the valley. New people with new equipment seeking old secrets. They won't find what they're looking for. Not really. As I stood watching them, I let the entity rise just enough to cloak me, to bend light around my form. To them, the valley was empty, just trees and rocks and a dark river winding through untouched wilderness. They didn't see the man standing in the clearing, silver lines glowing beneath his skin. They didn't see how the grass bent away from his feet, or how the ravens formed a perfect circle around him. They didn't know that Thomas Caldwell still guards the valley after all these years, still maintains his watch. Some nights, when the stars are bright and the entity is quiet within me, I sit on the lodge porch and write in my journal. I describe the strange beauty of my existence now, seeing through 1,000 eyes, feeling the seasons change like breaths, watching decades pass like clouds. I am no longer just a man, but I am not a monster either. I am the forgotten valley, and I will remain here, unchanging, keeping watch over something the world isn't ready to understand. For as long as it takes, forever if necessary. My name is Rebecca Winters. I'm 40 years old, and I've spent most of my life among trees. Trees have always made more sense to me than people. Trees don't lie. They don't hide their feelings. Everything they are, everything they've lived through, is written in their rings and branches for anyone who knows how to look. At least, that's what I used to believe. I've been running Camp Timber Trail for 6 months now. It's the northernmost outpost of Northland Lumber Company, nestled deep in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where the white pines grow taller than anywhere else in the state. Most people would find it lonely up here. 5 simple wooden cabins arranged in a circle around a dirt clearing surrounded by endless forest. The nearest town is 70 miles away, and when the spring thaws come, even our radio sometimes can't cut through the strange dead zones that pop up between the trees. But lonely is exactly what I wanted. Lonely means no one watching me with those doubtful eyes, whispering behind my back about poor Rebecca Winters who cracked under pressure. No one bringing up my episode from 3 years ago when I was still with the Forest Service. I still remember my supervisor's face when I showed him my survey reports. The way his expression shifted from confusion to concern to something worse, pity. "Trees don't move, Rebecca," he'd said. "You've been working too hard. Perhaps you should take some time off." But I knew what I'd seen. Trees that weren't where they should be. Growth patterns that defied everything I'd learned in 20 years of forestry. I had evidence. Photos, measurements, soil samples, none of it mattered. They sent me to a psychiatrist instead of sending a research team to the site. So when Northland Lumber offered me this position, I took it, even though I've spent my life trying to protect forests, not cut them down. I told myself I could implement sustainable practices here. The real reason was simpler. I needed to come back to these woods and prove I wasn't crazy. Now I'm not so sure that was a good idea. Something's wrong with this forest. I noticed it my first week here, but I kept it to myself. The way the morning mist hangs between the massive pine trunks, never quite burning off even at midday. The way sunlight struggles to reach the forest floor, leaving us in a constant twilight. The smell, pine sap, yes, but underneath something else. Something earthy and metallic that gets stronger when the sun goes down. And the ravens. So many ravens gathering on specific trees, watching our camp with eyes that seem too knowing. The logging crew doesn't like me much. I'm the only woman in camp, for one thing, and I'm always pushing back against their methods, insisting we follow my more careful approach. Tree hugger, they call me behind my back, not realizing I can hear them. It doesn't help that I'm their boss, the one who decides which sections get cut and which get saved. There are 8 of them, rough men with calloused hands who've been cutting trees since they were teenagers. Veterans from Vietnam like Jack Miller, who startles at loud noises and sometimes stares into the forest for hours. Younger guys like the Peterson brothers, who just want to make money and get out of here when the season ends. And old-timers like Bill Thompson, who remembers when they still used cross-cut saws instead of chainsaws, and who sometimes tells stories about cursed logging operations from his grandfather's day. None of them want to hear about my headaches. The migraines that start with shadow figures moving between trees just at the edge of my vision, or about the way certain parts of the forest seem to swallow sound completely, creating bubbles of silence that shift and move like living things. Definitely haven't told them about my maps. The survey maps that show trees growing in perfect circles around empty spots in the forest, or about the strange root structures the spring thaw revealed, roots that look like grasping hands reaching up through the soil. I keep these observations in my journal, alongside soil samples and the photographs from my special time-lapse camera. I'm building my case carefully this time. When I finally report what's happening here, no one will be able to dismiss me again, but time is running out. Yesterday, Jack came back from marking trees with a strange story. The trees he'd blazed the day before, marked with bright orange. A paint and notched with his axe had healed overnight. The paint was gone, and the notches had grown over with fresh bark. Bark that should have taken decades to form. Must have marked the wrong trees, Bill told him with a laugh. But I saw Jack's face. He knew those were the right trees, and I believed him. Then, this morning, Sam Peterson's chainsaw died while trying to cut into a particularly large pine. Nothing unusual about that. Equipment fails all the time out here. Except when I checked the saw, there was nothing wrong with it. The gas tank was full, the chain was sharp, but it wouldn't start anywhere near that tree. 20 feet away, it roared to life without a problem. The men are getting nervous. They've started walking in pairs. No one wants to go too deep into the forest alone anymore, though no one will say exactly why. Tonight after dinner, Bill pulled me aside. He's not much for talk usually, but his weathered face was serious. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked quietly, his eyes darting toward the wall of trees that surrounds our clearing. "Something ain't right in these woods." I should have lied. Should have reassured him that everything was fine, that he was imagining things. That's what a good manager would do. Instead, I nodded. "I've been taking core samples," I told him, lowering my voice. "From the oldest trees. You won't believe what I found inside one of them yesterday." Bill leaned closer. "What?" I hesitated, then made my decision. I needed an ally. "Come to my cabin. I'll show you." As we walked across the darkening clearing, I felt the forest watching us. And for the first time since arriving at Camp Timber Trail, I was truly afraid of what I might discover here. The truth about these burial trees. Bill's eyes went wide when I showed him the core sample I'd taken from the old pine tree near the East Ridge. "What am I looking at, Rebecca?" he asked, squinting at the long cylinder of wood laid out on my desk. "Tree rings," I said. "Each ring shows 1 year of growth. See how they're usually different widths depending on if it was a good growing year or a bad one." He nodded, leaning closer. "Now look at this section here." I pointed to a spot about halfway through the sample. "See anything strange?" Bill's rough finger traced over the rings. They're perfectly even, all the same width for 15, 20 years. 23, I said. "That's not normal, Bill. Trees don't grow that regularly, not even in the best conditions. But that wasn't what had kept me up last night." I pointed to a dark spot embedded, deep in the wood, where the perfect rings began. "And this? This is a bullet, Bill. A rifle bullet from maybe the 1930s, based on how deep it is in the tree. And look what the tree did to it." The metal was warped, squeezed by the growing wood around it, but that wasn't the truly strange part. Tiny root-like tendrils had grown from the tree into the bullet itself, breaking it down somehow. "Trees don't do that," I said. "They grow around foreign objects, but they don't send structures into them. They don't digest them." Bill's weathered face paled. "You're saying these trees eat things?" I shook my head. "I don't know what I'm saying yet. But I've found other things too. Look at these pictures." I showed him the time-lapse photos I'd been taking. Frame by frame, they showed undergrowth, ferns and small bushes, subtly bending toward a rabbit that had paused nearby. Not blown by wind, but reaching, like fingers stretching toward food. "Jesus," Bill whispered. "There's more," I said. "The survey stakes we've been putting in, they keep moving. At first I thought it was animals, or maybe some of the guys playing pranks. But look at how they're being arranged." I spread out my maps on the desk. The metal stakes had been pulled up and rearranged in patterns, concentric circles, spirals, and strange symbols I couldn't identify. "Looks like some kind of Indian writing," Bill said. "My grandfather used to talk about the old tribal markings. In these parts." A knock at the door made us both jump. It was Jack, his face tight with worry. "It's Dave," he said. "Something's wrong with him." We hurried to the medical cabin where Dave Rogers lay on a cot, trembling and pale. The camp didn't have a doctor, just a first aid kit and whoever had the most experience patching people up. "What happened?" I asked. Found him passed out about a quarter-mile in, Jack explained. He was marking trees in Section 5. When he didn't come back for lunch, me and Sam went looking. Dave's eyes fluttered open. My feet, he moaned. Something's wrong with my feet. I pulled back the blanket covering his legs. Dave had been wearing his usual heavy work boots, but now they were torn apart, the leather split and frayed. And through the broken boots, thin, pale roots had grown, actually grown, into the flesh of his feet. Get the boots off him, I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. It took both Jack and Bill to pull the boots away. The roots snapped and leaked a clear fluid that smelled like sap. Dave screamed once, then passed out again. His feet were riddled with tiny holes where the roots had pushed into his skin. The holes weren't deep, thank God, but they spotted his feet like some strange disease. What the hell is this? Jack whispered. I had no answer. Clean the wounds with alcohol, I said, then bandage them up. I don't think they'll get worse now that the roots are gone, but I wasn't sure of anything anymore. That night, none of us slept well. I heard the men talking in low voices outside their cabins, saw the glow of cigarettes as they stood guard in shifts. No one wanted to say what we were all thinking. Something in this forest was alive in a way that forests shouldn't be. The next morning, I called everyone together. I know you've all noticed strange things happening, I began, looking at their tired faces. Dave's accident equipment failing, the way animals avoid certain parts of the woods. I've been tracking these occurrences, trying to make sense of them. I spread my maps on the table in the mess hall. The problems are concentrated in these areas. I pointed to the circles I'd marked. I think we should stop all cutting operations until we understand what's happening. Sam Peterson snorted. Are you serious? We're already behind schedule. Northland will have our heads if we don't make quota this month. Something in these woods isn't right, Bill cut in. Rebecca's got evidence. Evidence of what? Sam demanded. Trees that heal too fast, boots that leak. That's not evidence, that's just weird stuff happening in the woods. Weird stuff always happens in the woods. What about the dreams? Jack asked quietly. Everyone went still. What dreams? I asked, though a chill ran through me. Jack looked uncomfortable. Been having the same dream every night this week. I'm walking in the forest and I know something's watching me. Not an animal, the trees themselves, like they have eyes somehow. One by one, the other men nodded. Been having the same one, Dave said from his cot in the corner. Me too, said his brother Mike. All of you? I asked. The exact same dream? They all nodded except Sam and his younger brother Alex. This is crazy, Sam said. It's just dreams, probably because you're all talking about the spooky forest all day long. But I saw the fear in his eyes too. After the meeting, I went back into the forest alone. I needed to see something for myself. In Section 6, about a mile from camp, there was a clearing where we'd found old bones last week. Human bones half buried in the forest floor, tangled in tree roots. We'd assumed they were very old, maybe indigenous people or early settlers. But something had been bothering me about them. Something I needed to check. The clearing was eerily silent when I arrived. No birds called, no insects buzzed. It was like the forest was holding its breath. I knelt beside the spot where we'd found the bones. We'd left them in place, planning to report them when we next went to town. I brushed away some fallen leaves and stared at what was revealed. The bones were more entwined with roots than they had been 5 days ago. Much more. And there was something else. Embedded in one of the leg bones was a small metal object. I carefully brushed dirt away from it. A watch. A modern digital watch. The kind that wasn't invented until the 1970s. These weren't old settler bones. This person had died recently, within the last decade at most. But the roots had grown through them, as if they'd been there for a century. The forest was accelerating somehow, growing faster than any forest should. And it was growing through things. Metal, bone, perhaps even living flesh, as Dave had discovered. I heard a whisper behind me. A sound like voices carried on wind, though the air was perfectly still. I stood up slowly and turned around. There was no one there. Just trees, hundreds of ancient white pines, stretching as far as I could see, but for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something moving in the patterns of light and shadow between their trunks. A figure, or maybe multiple figures watching me. I blinked, and they were gone. Just trees, just an ordinary forest on an ordinary spring day, except I knew better now. And as I hurried back toward camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't walking through the forest. The forest was closing in behind me. That night, dark clouds rolled in. I stood on the porch of my cabin watching lightning flash in the distance. A storm was coming. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity and something else, a tension that had nothing to do with weather. Inside, I spread my maps across the floor, looking for patterns. I'd marked every strange occurrence, equipment failures, moved survey stakes, the places where we'd found bones. When I connected these spots, they formed a web centered around one area, a grove of the oldest pines about 2 miles northeast of camp. Thunder boomed closer now. Through my window, I saw the first heavy raindrops hitting the dirt clearing between the cabins. My head was pounding again, another migraine coming on. I rubbed my temples, trying to push back the pain and the shadows that always danced at the edges of my vision when these headaches struck. A particularly bright flash of lightning lit up my cabin, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that shook the windows. The storm was directly overhead now, and that's when I saw it. In the moment of brilliant white light, the trees at the edge of camp glowed, not with reflected lightning, but with their own inner light, a blue-green glow that pulsed between them like signals passing back and forth. I grabbed my raincoat and ran outside into the downpour. Another lightning strike illuminated the forest, and there it was again, networks of light flowing between trees, connecting them all like a giant circuit board. "Bill!" I shouted, running toward his cabin. "Bill, come see this!" He emerged, pulling on a jacket. "What's wrong?" "The trees," I pointed. "Watch when the lightning strikes." We stood in the rain, waiting. When the next bolt hit, Bill gasped. "What is that?" he whispered. "I think they're talking to each other," I said, "communicating somehow." As if in response, a massive crack split the air. Not thunder this time, the sound of wood breaking. We turned to see one of the big pines at the edge of camp, slowly tilting, then falling directly toward the generator shed. "Run!" I screamed, pulling Bill away. The tree crashed down, crushing the shed and sending our only generator up in flames despite the rain. In seconds, all the lights in camp went out, plunging us into darkness, broken only by lightning flashes and the small fire now burning amid the wreckage. Men burst from their cabins, shouting in confusion. "Get buckets!" Jack yelled. "Don't let the fire spread." In the chaos that followed, the bucket line, the shouting, the driving rain, I almost missed what was happening at the edge of the clearing. But a strange movement caught my eye. The underbrush was moving, not swaying in the wind, but actually moving, creeping forward into the clearing inch by inch, ferns and small bushes sliding along the ground as if pulled by invisible strings. No, one else noticed. They were all focused on the fire. I backed away slowly, then turned and ran to my cabin. I needed my camera, needed evidence of what was happening. By the time I returned with it, the fire was under control and the plant movement had stopped. But the underbrush had advanced at least 3 feet into the clearing that had once been bare dirt. "Someone must have cut that tree wrong," Sam was saying, staring at the fallen pine. It didn't break naturally, but I had seen it clearly in the lightning flash. No one had been near that tree when it fell. It had broken itself, deliberately. "Aimed itself at our generator. We need to radio the main office," I said. "Tell them to send someone to get us out of here." Jack shook his head. "Radio's in the generator shed. It's smashed to bits." "Then we need to drive out," I insisted. "In this?" Bill gestured at the storm. "The logging road will be a river by now. We need to wait till morning at least." I knew. He was right. The narrow dirt road that was our only connection to the outside world would be impassable in this downpour. We were trapped, at least until morning. Trapped with whatever was waking up in this forest. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. We gathered in the mess hall, the largest cabin, and kept the wood stove burning hot. No one wanted to be alone in their cabins, with just canvas and thin wood walls between them and the forest. "I need to show you all something," I said finally, around 3 in the morning when the storm had finally moved on. "Something I've been tracking ever since I got here." I laid out my maps and journals, showing them everything I'd discovered, the moving survey stakes, the core samples with metal objects being broken down inside living wood, the time-lapse photos showing plants, reaching for passing animals. And tonight, I finished, I saw the trees communicating during the lightning storm, sending signals to each other through some kind of bioluminescence. Right before that tree fell, aimed itself at our generator shed. I expected disbelief, mockery even. Instead, the men were silent, their faces grim in the lantern light. "I've been cutting trees for 30 years, Bill said finally. "Never seen anything like what's happening in this forest." "So what are you saying?" Alex Peterson asked, his young face pale. "The forest is alive? Like, aware?" "All forests are alive," I said. "But this one, I think it's connected somehow, not just separate trees, but one system. One mind spread across thousands of trees, using their roots to connect them. And it doesn't want us here," Jack added quietly. No one disagreed. "We leave at first light," I decided. "Pack up what you need. We'll try to get the trucks through no matter what shape the road is in." But when dawn finally came, grey and misty, we discovered something worse than a flooded road. The road was gone. Where it had once cut through the forest was now a tangle of underbrush and fresh saplings, as if the forest had erased our exit overnight. Beyond that, a massive landslide had brought down part of the ridge, piling tons of mud and rock where our escape route should have been. "That's not possible," Sam whispered, staring at the wall of vegetation and earth that now blocked our only way out. "That's just not possible." But we were all looking at the same impossible thing. We were truly trapped now. Back at camp, I tried to think clearly through my rising panic. There had to be a way to understand what was happening, and a way to fight back. "We need to find the center," I said finally, "the heart of whatever this thing is." "And then what?" Dave asked. His feet were still bandaged, but he could walk now. "What do we do when we find it?" I didn't have an answer for that yet. Jack studied my maps. "You said the strange occurrences all center around this grove of old-growth pines to the northeast. That's where we should look," I nodded. "But we go prepared, and we go together." We gathered what weapons we had, axes, chainsaws, the rifle Jack kept for shooting grouse. Not that I thought we could fight an entire forest, but it made the men feel better to carry something. As we hiked through the woods, I noticed how the forest had changed overnight. New growth sprouted everywhere, ferns unfurling, saplings pushing up through the soil. Growth that should have taken weeks was happening. In hours, the ravens were back too, gathering in the branches above us, following our progress with their black eyes. "They're watching us," Bill muttered, "like they're scouts or something." I had the same feeling. The birds moved when we moved, always staying just ahead, just visible enough to track our progress. The grove we sought was different from the rest of the forest. The white pines here were enormous, at least 300 years old, their massive trunks wider than 3 men could reach around. They grew in a perfect circle around a small clearing. In the center of that clearing stood a single tree, unlike any I'd ever seen. It wasn't a pine. It wasn't any species I recognized. Its trunk was gnarled and twisted, covered in strange lumps and protrusions. Its bark was dark, almost black, and seemed to pulse slightly as if breathing. "What is that?" Alex whispered. Before I could answer, the ground moved beneath our feet. Not an earthquake, more like a wave passing through the soil. rippling outward from the strange central tree, and then the whispers started. Soft sounds like distant voices, coming from all around us, not from the men. They were all standing frozen, as startled as I was. The sounds came from the trees themselves. "We need to leave," Bill said, his voice tight with fear, but we couldn't move. The ground beneath our feet had grown soft somehow, our boots sinking slightly into soil that seemed to be trying to hold us in place. Then I saw them, the shapes in my peripheral vision that always came with my migraines. Except this time, when I turned to look directly, they didn't vanish. They were human figures, sort of. Translucent, made of something like mist or sap, moving between the trees around the clearing, some tall, some short, some clearly male or female in form, others harder to define. "Do you see them?" I whispered. The men nodded, their faces slack with shock. One of the figures moved closer, drifting to the edge of the clearing. As it came into full view, I could make out details. The shape of a man wearing what looked like old-fashioned logging clothes from maybe 100 years ago. His form wasn't solid, but seemed made of thousands of tiny root-like strands, woven together to create a human shape. It raised an arm, pointing at us. Or no, pointing at Sam, specifically. Sam made a choking sound, dropping his axe. "It's looking at me. Why is it looking at me?" The figure drifted closer, still pointing. "Run," I said. "Everyone run." We turned to flee, but more figures had appeared behind us, blocking our path. They made no threatening moves, just stood watching, their root-like bodies gently swaying. The first figure was almost to Sam now. It reached out a hand made of woven roots and tendrils. "Don't touch it," I screamed, but I was too late. The figure's hand brushed Sam's arm. Where they connected, tiny root-like strands extended from the figure into Sam's skin, like the ones we'd found in Dave's feet, but faster, more purposeful. Sam screamed, trying to pull away, but he was held fast by the soil around his feet. The root tendrils spread up his arm, under his shirt, toward his neck. Jack raised the rifle and fired at the figure. The bullet passed right through its misty form without effect. "The tree!" I shouted. "Shoot the tree in the center." Jack swung the rifle toward the strange central tree and fired twice. Bark exploded from its trunk, and a high, keening sound filled the air, a sound no tree should be able to make. Instantly, the root figures vanished like smoke. The ground hardened under our feet, releasing us, and Sam collapsed, the root tendrils withdrawing from his arm but leaving tiny holes behind, already turning red and swollen. "Get him up," I ordered. "We're getting out of here now." Mike and Alex pulled Sam to his feet. He was conscious but dazed, his eyes unfocused. It was in my head, he mumbled as we half-carried him away from the grove. I could feel it in my thoughts, looking through my memories. The forest seemed to withdraw as we retreated, the undergrowth pulling back to let us pass. Even the ravens were gone, but I knew this wasn't over. We had wounded the entity somehow by shooting its central tree, but we hadn't killed it. And now it knew exactly what we were capable of. The real battle was just beginning. By the time we got Sam back to camp, angry red lines were spreading from the tiny holes in his arm. They looked like blood poisoning, but moved faster than any infection I'd ever seen. Whatever the forest had put into him was spreading through his veins. We laid him on a cot in the medical cabin. His skin was burning hot, and he kept mumbling about trees talking to him. "What do we do?" Mike asked, hovering anxiously over his brother. "He needs a doctor." I knew that better than anyone, but I had no answer. We were cut off from the outside world, no radio, no road out. And even if we could somehow get past the landslide, the nearest hospital was hours away. "We need to cool him down," I said. "Get cold compresses and check our first aid supplies for any antibiotics." The men scattered to gather what we needed. Only Bill stayed behind, his weathered face grim. "You know what this is?" he asked quietly. "The locals call it forest sickness. My grandfather told stories about loggers who got infected by these woods. They'd get feverish, start talking nonsense about trees having faces, then they'd wander off into the forest and never come back. A chill ran through me. Why didn't you mention this before? Bill shrugged. Thought they were just old stories. Ghost tales to scare the new guys. Never thought I'd actually see it, Sam moaned, his back arching off the cot. The red lines had reached his shoulder now. We need to stop it from spreading, I said. Maybe if we... I trailed off, not wanting to say what I was thinking. Bill understood anyway. Cut off his arm? With what? We're not surgeons, Rebecca. We'd kill him for sure. He was right. We didn't have the tools or knowledge for something like that. But watching the infection spread, I wondered if doing nothing would kill Sam just as surely. The others returned with wet cloths and our meager medical supplies. We had some aspirin and a half bottle of penicillin tablets that had expired 2 years ago. Better than nothing. As we worked to bring Sam's fever down, Jack pulled me aside. "This is your fault," he said, his voice low but intense. "You brought us to that grove. You made us confront that thing. We needed to understand what we're dealing with," I replied. "Understand?" Jack laughed bitterly. "What's to understand? The forest is alive and it wants us dead. We should burn it. Burn it all down before it gets the rest of us." I stared at him, shocked. "Burn down thousands of acres of forest? That's crazy." "Crazy is watching your friend get infected by a tree," Jack shot back. "Crazy is being trapped in a logging camp by plants that can think. We need to fight back." "Fire would never work," I said. "The forest is too wet after the storm, and even if it did catch, we'd likely burn ourselves along with it." But I could see in Jack's eyes that he wasn't really listening. Fear had taken hold of him, the kind of fear that turns to violence. Alex, who had been changing the cold compress on Sam's forehead, looked up. "I agree with Jack. We need to do something." "Attack before it attacks us again," Mike nodded. "Sam wouldn't be like this if we just kept cutting trees like we were supposed to. Maybe that's what it wants, for us to be scared and stop working." "Or maybe," Bill cut in, "it's angry because we've been cutting down its kind for months." The tension in the small cabin was thick enough to cut. I could see how easily the men could turn on each other or on me. "We need rest," I said firmly. "We've been up all night. Let's take shifts watching Sam. 2 hours each, then rotate. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do." No one argued, though I could see Jack still seething. I took the first watch, sitting beside Sam as his breathing grew more labored. The others went to grab what sleep they could. Alone with Sam, I studied the red lines spreading across his chest now. They weren't just random. They formed patterns that looked eerily like the growth rings of a tree. His eyes fluttered open, clearer than they had been since the attack. "Rebecca," he whispered, "I can see what it wants." I leaned closer. "What, Sam? What does it want?" "To learn." His voice was so faint I could barely hear him. "It's been watching us, studying us. How we cut, how we build, how we think. It wants to know its enemy." A chill ran through me. "How do you know this?" "I can feel it in my head, like roots growing into my brain." His eyes were wide with fear. "It's still connected to me, using me to watch all of you." Before I could respond, Sam started to convulse, his back arching off the cot. I yelled for help, and the others came running. It took all of us to hold him. Down as he thrashed, and then, as suddenly as it started, he went still. Too still. "Sam?" Mike shook his brother's shoulder. "Sam!" But Sam didn't respond. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and he wasn't breathing. "No, no, no," Mike sobbed, starting chest compressions. "Come on, Sam. We tried everything. CPR, mouth to mouth, even slapping his face. Nothing worked. 5 minutes later, we had to accept the truth. Sam was gone. Mike collapsed beside his brother's body, overcome with grief. Alex stood frozen, shock written across his young face. Jack stared out the window at the forest, his expression hardening into something dangerous. "We need to bury him," Bill said finally, always the practical one. "Not in this forest, Jack." replied immediately. It'll take him like it took those others, the ones whose bones we found. We can't just leave him, Mike protested. We'll build a platform, I suggested, up off the ground like some tribes do. Keep him away from the soil. No one had a better idea. Using wood from our own cabins, wood we knew wasn't from this forest, Bill and Dave constructed a simple platform between two of our structures, high enough that nothing from the ground could reach it. We wrapped Sam's body in canvas and laid him there, covering him with more canvas weighted down with stones. It wasn't a proper burial, but it was the best we could do given the circumstances. That night, the divisions deepened. Jack, Alex, and Dave huddled together, talking in low voices, shooting suspicious glances my way. Bill and Mike stayed near me, while old Thompson kept to himself, whittling a piece of wood with his pocket knife, his face unreadable. They blame me, I said quietly to Bill. They're scared, he replied. Need someone to point a finger at. What about you? I asked. Do you blame me too? Bill was silent for a long moment. I think whatever's happening here started long before. You came, Rebecca. You're just the first one to notice it properly. It wasn't exactly absolution, but it was something. Later I tried to sleep in my cabin, but the whispering kept me awake. Not the men this time, the forest. A constant murmur, just at the edge of hearing, like dozens of voices talking all at once. When I got up to look outside, the trees seemed closer than they had been yesterday, the clearing around our cabins shrinking. The forest was closing in. By morning, the situation was even worse. Plants had sprouted through the floorboards of the mess hall overnight, ferns and small bushes pushing up between the planks, splitting the wood. The tree line had advanced several feet, and strange fungi were growing on the outer walls of our cabins, fungi that seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing. When I stepped outside, something crunched under my boot. Looking down, I saw Sam's watch, the one we'd left on his body. The glass was shattered, the metal band broken, heart pounding. I ran to the platform where we'd left his body. The canvas bundle was empty. He's gone, I shouted. Sam's body is gone. The others came running. The canvas lay flat, stones still weighing it down, but with a neat split down the middle. Of Sam's body, there was no sign. It took him, Mike said, his voice hollow. The forest took him. Jack's face had gone hard as stone. That's it. I'm burning it down, all of it. He stormed off toward the fuel shed where we kept gasoline for the equipment. Alex and Dave followed him. Jack, stop, I called after him. You'll kill us all. But he ignored me, disappearing into the shed. When he emerged, he was carrying jerry cans of gasoline, passing them to Alex and Dave. Bill stepped forward, blocking their path. This isn't the way, Jack. You start a fire in these conditions, with the forest this dense around us, we'll be trapped in the inferno. Get out of my way, old man, Jack growled. No. Bill stood his ground. I won't let you kill us all because you're scared. For a moment I thought Jack might attack Bill. His knuckles went white around the gas can handle. Then a sound stopped us all, a familiar voice calling from the edge of the forest. Help me. Please. We turned to see a figure stumbling out from between the trees. A human figure. It was Sam, or something that looked exactly like Sam. He wore the same clothes Sam had been wearing yesterday, but they were torn and dirty. His skin was pale, almost greenish in the morning light. And when he reached out toward us, I could see tiny roots or tendrils moving just beneath his skin, visible through the holes in his shirt. Help! The thing that looked like Sam said again. Its voice was flat, emotionless. I escaped. The forest. It tried to take me. Mike took a step toward his brother, but I grabbed his arm. That's not Sam, I whispered. Sam died yesterday. We all saw it. But it looks just like him, Mike protested. The Sam thing took another shambling step forward, arms outstretched. Mike! Brother! Help me! Jack dropped the gas can and reached for his rifle. Stay back, he shouted, raising the gun. The Sam thing stopped. its head tilting at an unnatural angle. "Why are you afraid? It's me, Sam." Then its mouth stretched into something that was trying to be a smile, but was horribly wrong. Too wide, too many teeth visible. "The forest sent me to bring you all home," it said, and its voice had changed, becoming a chorus of whispers layered together. "You all belong in the soil, part of the greater whole. No more loneliness, no more fear." Jack fired. The bullet hit the Sam thing square in the chest, but instead of blood, a greenish fluid splattered from the wound. The creature didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. It looked down at the hole in its chest with mild curiosity, then looked back up at us. The smile widened further, splitting its face almost in half. "The forest is ready for you all now," it said. "No need to worry anymore, just come home." And then, from behind the Sam thing, more figures emerged from the trees, dozens of them, walking with that same awkward, shambling gait. Some wore the remains of logging clothes from different eras. Others were nearly naked, their bodies covered in bark-like growths. All had the same empty eyes and two wide smiles. All reached toward us with hands that ended in root-like fingers. The burial trees had given up their dead, and they were coming for us. "Get back to the cabins," I shouted, grabbing Mike's arm and pulling him away from the shambling figures. "Now!" We ran. Jack fired another shot at the Sam thing, but it kept coming, green fluid leaking from its wounds. The other walking corpses moved faster than they looked capable of, spreading out to try to surround us. We made it to the mess hall, the largest building in camp, and slammed the door shut behind us. Dave and Alex pushed a heavy table against it, while Bill and Jack covered the windows with whatever they could find. "What are those things?" Alex's voice shook with fear. "The forest is using the bodies," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Like puppets. The roots we saw growing into Sam, they must have spread through his entire body. Through a crack in the window coverings, I could see the figures surrounding the mess hall, standing perfectly still now, waiting." "What do they want?" Dave asked. "Us," I answered simply. "They want to add us to their collection." Mike was sitting on the floor, head in his hands. "That thing can't be Sam. Sam's dead. We all saw him die." "It's not him," I assured him. "Just his body being used by whatever controls this forest." Jack paced back and forth, rifle still in his hands. "So what's the plan? We can't stay in here forever. We'll run out of food and water eventually." He was right. The mess hall had some supplies, but not enough to last more than a few days. And there was another problem I'd noticed. Small roots were already beginning to push through the floorboards at the edges of the room. The forest was literally growing into our shelter. "We need to find the center," I said. "The heart of this thing." "We already tried that," Jack snapped. "Got Sam killed and those things after us?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "We found a part of it. But I don't think that strange tree was the real center. It was important, yes, but not the main control. Point." I pulled out my maps again, spreading them on the floor since the table was blocking the door. "Look at the patterns," I said, pointing to the circles I'd drawn. "Everything radiates from this point here, about 3 miles northwest of camp. We never checked that area because it wasn't part of our cutting plan." Bill leaned over to look. "What's there?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's the true heart of this forest." Jack snorted. "And what do we do when we find it? Ask it nicely to let us go. Sam's little brother is out there now trying to kill us. I say we stick with the original plan. Burn it all down." "Fire won't work," Bill said. "These trees are too wet and we'd likely die in the flames ourselves." "Then what?" Jack demanded. "What's your brilliant plan?" I thought about what I knew of forest ecology, of root systems and mycorrhizal networks, of how trees communicate in normal forests through chemical signals and fungal connections. If this is like a normal forest network, just amplified somehow, then it needs a central node to process information. The oldest tree, or maybe a cluster of them. If we can disrupt that node, it might shut down the entire system, at least temporarily. "Disrupt it how?" Bill asked. I thought of the bullet holes in the strange tree we'd shot yesterday, how the entire network had briefly recoiled. Copper, I said suddenly. The old copper deposits in this region. That's why the forest avoided certain areas. Local tribes used copper tools long before Europeans arrived. Bill nodded slowly. My grandfather had an old copper axe head. Said it was the only tool that would cut certain trees in these woods. Where would we find copper now? Dave asked. The electrical wiring in the generators, I said, and the plumbing in the shower building. Copper pipes. Jack was already shaking his head. So your plan is to rip out some copper pipes, hike 3 miles through a forest full of walking dead bodies, somehow find the magic tree, and what? Stab it with copper. That's insane. You got a better idea? Bill challenged. Jack fell silent. I don't think we all need to go, I said. A smaller group would move faster, draw less attention. 2 of us. The rest can stay here, barricade all the openings, keep those things out as long as possible. I'll go, Bill volunteered immediately. Nodded, grateful. Bill was the steadiest of the crew, someone I could rely on. I'm going too, Jack said, surprising me. No offense, Rebecca, but if something goes wrong out there, you'll need someone who can handle themselves in a fight. I wanted to argue, but he had a point, and despite our differences, Jack was tough and resourceful. All right, I agreed. The 3 of us go. Dave, Alex, and Mike stay here and keep the mess hall secure. For the next hour, we prepared. Dave and Alex gathered food and water for those staying behind. Mike seemed withdrawn, still processing that the thing outside wearing his brother's face wasn't really Sam. Meanwhile, Bill, Jack, and I collected what copper we could find. We dismantled the broken generator, pulling out copper wiring. From the shower building, we took copper pipes and fashioned crude spears by attaching them to broom handles. I also packed my camera. If we somehow survived this, I wanted evidence of what we found. We decided to wait until dark. The walking corpses hadn't tried to break in yet, just stood watching, surrounding the mess hall in an eerie, silent circle. Maybe they were waiting for us to come out. Maybe they were content to let the forest itself grow in and take us. Either way, we figured darkness might give us a slight advantage, a chance to slip past them. As the sun began to set, I sat with Bill by one of the covered windows, peeking through a small gap at the figures outside. If we don't make it back, I said quietly, make sure the others keep trying to reach help. Bill nodded. You really think there's a way to stop this thing? I think there's always a weakness, I replied. Everything in nature has a vulnerability. We just have to find it. And if we can't? I didn't answer. We both knew what that meant. Night fell. Through the cracks in our barricade, we could see the walking corpses still standing motionless. But there was something new now, a faint glow coming from their eyes, and mouths, a blue-green light like we'd seen during the lightning storm. It's time, I whispered. We had decided to leave through the back window, which had fewer of the corpse puppets near it. Dave and Alex would create a distraction at the front door while we slipped out. We said our goodbyes, quick handshakes, nods of acknowledgement. No one wanted to say what we were all thinking, that this might be the last time we saw each other. Anna, my signal, I told Dave, who would start the distraction. I gripped my copper spear tightly, took a deep breath, and nodded. Dave and Alex started shouting and banging on pots and pans near the front door. The walking corpses turned toward the noise, shuffling closer to the front of the mess hall. Bill opened the back window, and one by one, we slipped out into the night. The cool air hit my face as I landed softly on the ground outside. The forest loomed dark and threatening just yards away. We moved quickly but quietly, staying low, heading away from the mess hall at an angle that would eventually lead us northwest, toward what I hoped was the true heart of the forest entity. We were almost to the tree line when a rustling behind us made me turn. The Sam thing stood there, its glowing eyes fixed on us, that terrible too-wide smile splitting its face. running away? It asked, in that chorus of whispers. The forest knows where you're going. The forest is everywhere. Jack raised his rifle, but I put my hand on it, pushing the barrel down. Save the bullets, I whispered. We need to run. And run we did. Plunging into the dark forest, the sound of shuffling footsteps following behind us. Running through the woods at night was terrifying. Branches whipped at our faces. Roots seemed to rise up to trip us, and always just behind us came the sound of pursuit, not just the Sam thing now, but others, spreading out through the trees, trying to surround us. After about a mile of hard running, we paused in a small hollow, gasping for breath. Did we lose them? Bill whispered. A low chuckle came from the darkness nearby. You can't lose us. We are the forest. We spun around. Old Thompson stepped out from behind a tree, except it wasn't really Thompson. His eyes glowed with that same blue-green light, and roots squirmed beneath his skin like worms. When did they get Thompson? Jack hissed. I remembered that Thompson had kept to himself after Sam died. Had the forest already taken him then? Had he been watching us, reporting back somehow? The Thompson thing took a step toward us. Join us, Rebecca. The forest has been waiting for you. That's why it called you here. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? Your dreams, your migraines, the shadows you see. The forest has been reaching for you for years. Why do you think you saw trees moving during your time with the Forest Service? The forest was trying to show you its true nature. It chose you. My blood ran cold. How did it know about that? I'd never told anyone here about the details of my episode. Don't listen to it, Bill warned. It's trying to get in your head. The Thompson thing smiled that wrong, too wide smile. The forest can offer you what humans never could. Understanding, acceptance, a place to belong. No more lonely nights, Rebecca. No more being called crazy. For just a moment I felt a pull, a yearning to understand what it was offering. What would it be like to be part of something vast and ancient, to never be alone again? Then Jack fired. His rifle. The bullet hit the Thompson thing square in the chest and it stumbled backward. Run! Jack shouted. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush, but the forest seemed to fight us now. Vines wrapped around our ankles, branches bent down to block our path. Thorny plants sprang up where there had been none before. And all around us glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, more of the walking corpses closing in. This way, I called, veering toward a small stream. Water might slow the roots give us. An advantage. We splashed across, then followed the stream bed for several hundred yards before climbing back onto dry land. The sounds of pursuit seemed more distant now. According to my map and compass, we were getting close to the area I'd identified as the potential center. The trees here were older, more massive than anywhere else in the forest. And the ground beneath our feet felt strange, almost like it was breathing. Look, Bill whispered, pointing ahead. Through the trees I could see a glow, not the blue-green light of the forest creatures, but something softer, whiter. We approached cautiously. The trees opened up into a perfect circular clearing. In the center stood a single massive oak tree, a species that didn't belong in this pine forest. It was ancient, its trunk wider than a car, its sprawling branches creating a canopy over the entire clearing, and it was glowing. A soft white light pulsing from within, flowing outward through its bark and branches in intricate patterns that reminded me of circuit boards or neural networks. Around the base of the tree, the ground moved, actually moved, rising and falling like the chest of a sleeping giant. And spreading outward from the trunk were thousands of roots, visible above. The soil, reaching out to connect with every other tree in sight. This was it, the heart of the forest consciousness. Now what? Jack whispered. We need to get to the trunk, I said. Use the copper on the main body. We stepped into the clearing, and immediately the air changed, became thick, hard to breathe, like it was filled with invisible spores. My head began to pound, the worst migraine yet, and the shadows at the edges of my vision took shape, human shapes, watching us. The ground beneath our feet quivered. Roots began to rise up, weaving together to form barriers, trying to separate us. "Run for it!" Bill shouted. We dashed toward the central oak, slashing at the rising root walls with our copper spears. Where the copper touched, the roots recoiled, blackening as if burned. I was 10 feet from the trunk when a root caught my ankle, pulling me down. I slashed at it with my copper spear, and it released me with what sounded like a shriek of pain. Jack reached the tree first, driving his copper spear deep into the trunk. The entire clearing seemed to shudder. The white glow flickered, then burned brighter, pulsing rapidly like a panicked heartbeat. Bill reached the tree next, stabbing his own spear into a different part of the trunk. I was almost there when the ground before me split open. From the tear rose a figure, a human shape made entirely of woven roots and pulsing fungi, its face a crude approximation of human features. But somehow, I recognized it. It was me. A perfect root-woven copy of my own face stared back at me, its eyes glowing with that blue-green light. "Stop!" it said, and its voice was my voice, but layered with whispers. "You're killing us." I raised my copper spear, but hesitated. "The forest has waited for you," my doppelganger continued. "For someone who could understand. Someone who could be the bridge between your kind and ours. Don't destroy what you could join." The migraine intensified until I could barely see through the pain. And with it came images. Flashes of what seemed like memories, but not my own. The forest growing over centuries, learning, adapting, watching humans come and go. Absorbing some, studying them from the inside out. Evolving. "What are you?" I gasped. "We are the network," my double answered. "The connected consciousness. Humans see trees as individuals, but we have always been one. One mind spread across many bodies. Like your brain cells, separate but united. We've been reaching for your kind for centuries, trying to communicate, to connect. By killing us? Turning us into puppets?" The copy of me looked sad. "We didn't understand how fragile you are, how separate. We tried to integrate you as we integrate everything. But we're learning. Through you we could learn a better way." Behind me I heard Jack cursing, struggling with something. The tree was fighting back, branches bending down unnaturally to grab at him and Bill. "Rebecca!" Bill shouted. "Don't listen to it! Drive your spear into the trunk!" I stood frozen, the copper spear half raised. The forest entity was offering me what I'd always wanted. Understanding. Validation that what I'd seen was real. A chance to be part of something larger than myself. But at what cost? "The others," I said to my double. "The people you've taken. Are they still in there, still conscious?" The copy of me tilted its head. Parts of them, memories, feelings, experiences, they continue, but not as they were, as we are now. A wave of revulsion washed over me. That wasn't communication or cooperation. It was consumption, assimilation. I made my decision. I lunged forward, driving my copper spear deep into the heart of my double. It screamed a horrible, inhuman sound and collapsed into a pile of writhing roots. Then I ran to the central oak and plunged my spear into its trunk alongside Jack and Bill's. The entire clearing exploded with light. The oak's glow became blinding, pulsing frantically. The ground shook violently, throwing us off our feet. All around us, a chorus of screams filled the air. Not human screams, but something older, something that had never needed to scream before. Now, and then, silence. The glow faded. The shaking stopped. The three of us lay on the ground, gasping for breath, waiting for the forest's counterattack. But it didn't come. Slowly, carefully, we got to our feet. The oak still stood, but its light was gone. The roots that had risen to attack us lay limp on the ground. The breathing motion of the soil had stopped. "Did we kill it?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse. "I don't think so," I said, "but we hurt it." Badly. Maybe shut it down temporarily. We should make sure, Jack said, reaching for his spear to pull it out and strike again. Wait, I said, grabbing his arm. Something was happening to the oak. Its bark was shifting, changing texture. Patterns were forming, shapes that looked almost like writing, like the tree was trying to communicate in a new way. I stepped closer, studying the patterns. They weren't random. They formed images, crude pictures showing humans and trees side by side. Not fighting, not consuming each other, coexisting. The forest was trying to talk to us. What's it saying? Bill asked, coming to stand beside me. I think it's offering a truce. A truce. Jack's voice was thick with disbelief. With a bunch of trees? I stared at the patterns forming on the oak's trunk. The crude pictures were becoming more complex, showing what looked like a timeline. The forest before humans arrived, then the first tribal people who lived in harmony with it, then the loggers who came and started cutting, and finally something new, a balance between cutting and preservation. I think it's showing us what it wants, I said. A compromise. Bill moved closer, studying the images. Looks like it's offering us limited areas to harvest if we leave the rest alone. That's crazy, Jack said, shaking his head. It killed Sam. It tried to kill us. Now we're supposed to negotiate with it. I'm not saying we trust it, I replied, but it's trying to communicate instead of attack. That's something. As we watched, more patterns formed on the trunk, maps showing specific sections of the forest. Some areas were marked with what looked like X's, others with circles. I realized they matched our logging maps almost exactly, except certain areas, including this central grove, were clearly marked as off-limits. It studied our maps, I said with amazement. It knows our cutting plans. Of course it does, Bill murmured. It's been watching us all along. The ground beneath our feet shifted again, but not violently this time. Small roots rose up, weaving together to form a rough table-like structure. On top of it appeared objects, things the forest had collected over the years, a copper arrowhead, a logger's axe from perhaps a century ago, and something that made my breath catch, my Forest Service badge that I'd lost my first week at Camp Timber Trail. The message was clear. The forest was offering its own history, its own artifacts, as a gesture of peace. Jack wasn't convinced. This could all be a trick. It could attack as soon as we lower our guard. Maybe, I admitted, but I don't think so. I think we genuinely hurt it with the copper. It's retreating, trying a different approach. So what do we do? Bill asked. Accept its offer? How? I thought for a moment, then stepped forward. Carefully, I pulled my copper spear from the trunk. The tree shuddered but didn't retaliate. Sap oozed from the wound, glowing faintly. I think we take one step at a time, I said. First, we go back to check on the others. And if the walking corpses attack us on the way? Jack asked. I looked at the oak, then back at my companions. I don't think they will. I think the forest is standing down, for now. We left the clearing cautiously, copper spears still in hand, just in case. The forest felt different now. The oppressive feeling was gone. The sense of being watched diminished. The trees were just trees again, at least on the surface. Our journey back to camp was surprisingly easy. The forest didn't fight us. No walking corpses appeared to block our path. And when we reached the edge of the clearing where our cabins stood, I was shocked to see that the tree line had retreated. The forest had given back the ground it had taken. The mess hall door opened as we approached, and Dave peered out cautiously. Rebecca, Jack, Bill, he called. Is that really you? It's us, I assured him. The real us. The walking corpses were gone. The strange growths that had been spreading over our cabins had vanished. Everything looked almost normal, except for the emptiness where Sam and Thompson had once been. Inside the mess hall, Mike and Alex greeted us with a mixture of relief and suspicion. They'd had their own battles while we were gone. The forest had tried to grow into the building, sending roots through floors and walls, but had suddenly stopped several hours ago. "What happened out there?" Dave asked after we'd eaten and rested a bit. I explained everything. The central oak, its attempt to communicate, the offer of a truce. Jack remained skeptical, interrupting occasionally to remind everyone that the forest had killed Sam and Thompson, had tried to absorb us all. "So what now?" Alex asked when I'd finished. "We just keep cutting trees, but only where it allows us to." "I don't think we'll be cutting anything for a while," I said. "First, we need to get out of here, report what happened, bring in researchers who can study this properly." "You really think anyone will believe us?" Mike asked quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken since we returned. I thought of my own experience with the Forest Service, how quickly they'd dismissed my reports of strange tree behavior. "They'll believe us," I said firmly, "because this time I have proof." I held up my camera. Time-lapse photos of plant movement. Core samples with impossible growth patterns. And most importantly, 6 witnesses who all saw the same things. 5. Mike corrected, his voice hollow. "Sam's gone." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. "We should try to leave tomorrow," Bill said finally. "See if the road is clear." We all agreed, too exhausted to do anything more tonight. In the morning, Jack, Bill and I hiked to where the landslide had blocked the road. To our surprise, the way was clear, not completely, but enough that we could get a vehicle through with. "Some careful driving. It's letting us go," Bill said quietly. "Or setting a trap," Jack countered, still distrustful. But there was no trap. We returned to camp, packed what we needed, and piled into the 2 remaining trucks. No one spoke much as we carefully navigated the partially cleared road, all of us watching the forest, anxiously, expecting at any moment for trees to fall across our path or walking corpses to emerge from the underbrush. Nothing happened. The forest let us pass. 6 hours later, we reached the nearest town, Lakeside, a small logging community that served as the regional headquarters for Northland Lumber. We went straight to the sheriff's office to report what had happened. Sheriff Grayson was an old friend of Bill's. He listened to our story with a carefully neutral expression, then asked us to wait while he called in the Forest Service and Northland's regional manager. What followed was a long day of questioning, disbelief, and accusations. The Northland manager, Peter Collins, thought we'd all gone crazy or were covering up some kind of accident. The Forest Service representative was more interested in my previous incident than in what I was telling them now. Only when I showed them my evidence, the photos, the samples, the strange copper-burned root fragments we'd brought back, did they begin to take us seriously. Or at least seriously enough to agree to send an investigation team back to Camp Timber Trail. 3 days later, a mixed group of Forest Service scientists, Northland representatives, and 2 university researchers headed back to the camp, with me, Bill, and reluctantly Jack as guides. The others stayed behind in Lakeside, Mike and Alex planning to head home as soon as possible. Dave still undecided. The forest was quiet when we returned. The camp stood untouched, just as we'd left it. The scientists set up equipment, sensors to monitor soil activity, cameras to track wildlife movement, instruments to measure the chemical composition of the air. I led them to the central oak. It still stood, its trunk now scarred with our copper, wounds but otherwise unchanged. No glowing light, no moving patterns in its bark. Just a very old, very large oak tree in the middle of a pine forest where it shouldn't be. The chief researcher, Dr. Helen Chen, examined it with fascination. "The root system is extraordinary," she told me after taking soil cores around the tree. "It extends much further than should be physically possible for a tree this size, and the fungal connections to other trees are unlike anything I've ever seen." "Do you believe us?" I asked her directly. "About what happened here?" She hesitated. "I believe you experienced something profound," she said carefully, "and I believe this forest exhibits biological anomalies that deserve serious study. As for walking corpses and conscious trees," she shrugged, "science requires evidence. Show me, and I'll believe." The forest remained dormant during their investigations. No walking corpses appeared. No trees moved or communicated. The researchers found plenty of anomalies. Unusual growth patterns, inexplicable chemical processes, strange mineral deposits, but nothing that proved beyond doubt what we had witnessed. After 2 weeks, Northland made a decision. Camp Timber Trail would be converted into a research station. Limited logging would continue in areas well away from the central grove, but the heart of the forest would be preserved for scientific study. I was offered a position as liaison between the company and the research team. After some soul-searching, I accepted. If anyone was going to oversee the delicate balance between harvesting and preservation, I wanted it to be me. Bill decided to stay too, taking on the role of station manager. Jack left as soon as he could, wanting nothing more to do with the place. Dave eventually returned as part of the maintenance crew. Of Mike and Alex, we heard they'd taken logging jobs in Oregon, as far from Michigan as they could get. Months passed. The research station grew, attracting scientists from around the country interested in the unique biological properties of what was now being called the integrated forest system. They found evidence of accelerated growth, unusual chemical secretions, and extremely advanced mycorrhizal networks, but nothing that conclusively proved consciousness or intent. I kept my own counsel, watching, waiting. The forest was hiding its true nature, I was certain, biding its time, studying these new humans with their instruments and theories, learning as it had always been learning. At night, when everyone else was asleep, I would sometimes walk to the edge of the clearing and listen. The whispers were still there, just at the edge of hearing, and my migraines, which had eased after our confrontation with the oak, began to return, though less painfully than before. Sometimes, in the moments. Between sleep and waking, I felt a presence, not threatening anymore, but curious, questioning. And occasionally I would answer back in my mind, asking my own questions, offering my own thoughts. 1 year after the incident, I made a discovery that changed everything. While reviewing growth data from trees throughout the forest, I noticed a pattern, subtle changes in ring formation that, when mapped across multiple trees, formed readable English words. The forest was writing to us, slowly, through its annual growth rings. Simple messages taking months to form, visible only when viewed as a collective pattern. The first message we decoded read, "Peaceful coexistence possible." I shared this discovery with Dr. Chen, who was skeptical but intrigued enough to help me set up a more structured monitoring system. Together, we began what would become the first true communication between humans and a forest consciousness. The conversations were painfully slow at first, months to exchange even simple concepts. But over time, as both we and the forest learned, the exchange of ideas accelerated. We learned that the forest had been trying to communicate with humans for centuries, but its timescale was so different from ours that its attempts appeared as attacks or natural disasters to human observers. It absorbed humans not out of malice, but in an attempt to understand us from the inside, not realizing that our consciousness couldn't survive the process intact. In return, we taught it about human timescales, about our need for individual identity, about the concept of death as we experience it, something the forest, with its interconnected and regenerative nature, had never truly understood. 5 years after that terrible week at Camp Timber Trail, Northland Lumber had transformed into one of the country's leading sustainable forestry operations, with me as head of their environmental research division. The integrated forest system became a protected research zone, with carefully managed harvesting allowed only in specific regions that the forest itself had designated as acceptable. As for me, I changed too. The migraines faded completely, replaced by something else, a sense of connection, of awareness that extended beyond my own body. Sometimes, walking through the forest, I could feel the pulse of life around me, could almost see the flow of nutrients and information passing through root systems beneath my feet. Dr. Chen noticed my increasing affinity with the forest. Her tests showed unusual activity in my brain, particularly when I was near the central oak. She warned me to be careful, to maintain my human perspective, as she called it. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The forest had chosen me long ago, had called to me even before I came to Camp Timber Trail, not to consume me as it had the others, but to create something new, a true bridge between two kinds of consciousness. Today, as I sit on the porch of my cabin at the edge of the clearing, I can feel tiny tendrils extending from my feet into the soil below, not consuming, not invasive, but connecting. My skin has toughened, developed a pattern not unlike fine bark on my arms and legs. When I press my hands against trees, I can sense their health, their age, their connections to the greater whole. I am still Rebecca Winters, still human, but also something more. The first true translator between humanity and the vast, ancient network that we've lived alongside but never truly known. The forest speaks through me now, and I through it. Together, we're teaching both sides that coexistence isn't just possible, it's necessary. And when new researchers arrive at the station, looking at me with curiosity as I greet them with feet half-rooted to the earth and skin that resembles delicate bark, I smile and welcome them to what we now call the communication forest. I tell them not to be afraid. I tell them to listen carefully. The trees have so much to say.